The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with chandeliers and the glitter of diamonds worn by New York's elite. Ethan Kensington, at 45, was the king of this world. His designer tuxedo fit perfectly on his tall frame as he moved through, the crowd shaking hands and collecting praise like it was his birthright. "Ethan, the stock jumped 3 points today. You're a miracle worker," said George Hamilton, one of his investors, clapping him on the back. Ethan smiled confidently. "That's just the beginning, George. Wait until you see what I have planned for next quarter." From across the room, Isabel Kensington watched her husband with pride. At 42, she still turned heads in her emerald green gown that matched her eyes. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, showing off the diamond necklace Ethan had given her for their 15th anniversary. Isabel wasn't just Ethan's wife. She was the financial genius behind Kensington Enterprises. While Ethan was the face, everyone knew Isabel was the brain that made their empire grow. "Your husband certainly knows how to work a room," said Martha Wellington, wife of the city's mayor. Isabel nodded, taking a sip of champagne. "He's in his element here." What people didn't see was how hard they had both worked to get here. 15. Years ago, they had started with almost nothing, just a small office above a deli and a dream to build something big. Ethan had the charm and vision, while Isabel had the sharp mind for numbers and strategy. Together, they had climbed to the top. Isabel excused herself from Martha and headed to the ladies' room to freshen up. The night was going perfectly. The charity gala was raising millions for children's hospitals, and tomorrow she and Ethan would announce their company's biggest expansion yet. As she returned from the ladies' room, Isabel noticed her younger sister Olivia had arrived. At 35, Olivia was stunning in a tight red dress that showed off her perfect figure. The sisters hugged briefly. "You're late," Isabel said, but with a smile. She adored her sister, even though Olivia was her opposite in many ways. Impulsive, where Isabel was careful. Wild, where Isabel was steady. "Traffic was awful," Olivia said, scanning the room. "Where's that handsome husband of yours?" "Probably charming more money out of donors," Isabel laughed. "I'm going to find him. We need to make our speech soon." Isabel moved through the crowd, stopping occasionally to chat with friends and business associates. Everyone wanted a piece of her time, asking about the rumors of Kensington Enterprises buying out their biggest competitor. "You'll have to wait for tomorrow's announcement," she would say with a mysterious smile. After 15 minutes of searching, Isabel still hadn't found Ethan. She asked a waiter, who mentioned he had seen Mr. Kensington heading toward the terrace. Isabel thanked him and made her way through the French doors that led outside. The April night air was cool on her bare shoulders as she stepped onto the terrace. At first, she didn't see anyone, but then she heard low voices coming from the far corner, hidden behind a large potted plant. She started to call out Ethan's name, but stopped when she recognized his laugh. "We shouldn't be out here," said a woman's voice. "Someone might see us." "Let them," came Ethan's reply. "I'm tired of hiding how I feel." Isabel froze. Something in her husband's tone made her heart race with dread. Slowly she moved forward, her heels silent on the stone terrace. When she rounded the plant, the world seemed to stop. There was Ethan, his back to her, his arms wrapped around a woman in a red dress. They were kissing passionately, completely lost in each other. Isabel's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor. The sound made the couple break apart and turn, Ethan's face drained of color. "Isabel!" But it was the woman's face that made Isabel's knees go weak. Olivia. Her own sister stared back at her with guilt in her eyes, but not enough shame to look away. "How long?" Isabel asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Ethan stepped toward. "Belle, please, let me explain. How long?" Each word was ice. Olivia spoke up. 6 months. The betrayal hit Isabel like a physical blow. 6 months, half a year of lies, of sharing her bed with a man who was sleeping with her sister, of confiding in a sister who was betraying her. "Isabel, I was going to tell you," Ethan said, reaching for her arm. "After the expansion announcement, I didn't want to hurt the business." She jerked away from his touch. "The business," she repeated flatly. The doors to the terrace opened. Then a group of partygoers spilled out, laughing and holding champagne glasses. They stopped when they saw the three of them, sensing the tension. Among them was Patricia Winters, the Society columnist, whose articles were read by everyone in New York. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene: Ethan's rumpled jacket, Olivia's smeared lipstick, and Isabel's pale face. "Is everything all right?" Patricia asked, her phone already in her hand. Before Isabel could respond, a camera flashed. Someone from the event's photography team had captured the moment. In seconds, more phones appeared, more flashes went off. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Olivia with Ethan? Did Isabel catch them? Oh my God, her own sister." The ballroom had gone quiet as people began to notice the drama unfolding on the terrace. All eyes were on Isabel, waiting to see what she would do. Would she scream? Cry? Create a scene that would be talked about for years? Instead, Isabel did something no one expected. She calmly walked to a nearby waiter, took a fresh glass of champagne, and turned to face the crowd that had gathered. Her face showed nothing of the earthquake happening inside her. She lifted her glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and smiled. The silence in the room was complete. "Enjoy this moment, darling," she said to Ethan, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "Because when the sun rises, you'll have nothing." With that, she turned and walked through the crowd, which parted for her like the Red Sea. No one dared speak as the Queen of New York society made her exit with her head held high. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. Olivia looked suddenly small in her red dress, as if she had just realized the magnitude of what she had done. Patricia Winters was already typing frantically on her phone. By morning, everyone in the city would know about Ethan Kensington's betrayal and Isabel's chilling promise. In the back of the taxi, Isabel finally let the tears come. But they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of rage and determination. Ethan and Olivia had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated her. Wiping her face, Isabel took out her phone and made 3 calls. The first was to James Wilson, her personal lawyer. The second was to Maria Garcia, the chief financial officer of Kensington Enterprises and Isabel's closest ally in the company. The third was to the head of security at their penthouse apartment. "Don't let Mr. Kensington in," she instructed. "Change the codes immediately." By the time she reached home, Isabel had stopped crying. She packed only what she needed: some clothes, her laptop, and the file of emergency documents she had always kept locked in her desk drawer. Years of watching other wealthy marriages fall apart had taught her to be prepared, even if she never thought she'd need it. As she was leaving, she stopped at the safe hidden behind a painting in Ethan's study. Inside were not just valuable jewelry and cash, but backup drives containing all of Kensington Enterprises' confidential files and strategies. Ethan had insisted on keeping them at home, away from potential corporate spies. Now that decision would cost him everything. Isabel took it all. At midnight, she checked into the Four Seasons under her maiden name. By 1 a.m., she had set up her laptop and was going through files, sending emails and making plans. By 2 a.m., she had spoken to the board members she knew were loyal to her. By 3 a.m., she had transferred millions from their joint accounts to ones only she could access. At dawn, she stood by the window, watching the sun rise over Central Park. Her phone had been buzzing all night with calls and texts from Ethan, from Olivia, from friends and colleagues who had witnessed the scene at the gala. She had ignored them all. When her phone rang again, she finally answered it. It was Maria. "It's done," Maria said. "All his access has been revoked. The board has agreed to an emergency meeting this morning, and Patricia's article is already online. It's brutal." "Good," Isabel said. "I'll see you at 9. As she hung up, a text came through from an unknown number. It was a link to Patricia Winters' article headlined, "The Betrayal Heard Around the World, Ethan Kensington's Fall from Grace." The photo accompanying the article showed the exact moment Isabel had discovered them: Ethan turning from Olivia, the shock on his face, and Isabel standing tall, her face a study in dignified fury. For the first time since seeing her husband in her sister's arms, Isabel smiled. The world had expected a heartbroken wife. Instead, they were about to witness a queen reclaiming her throne, and this was just the beginning. Ethan Kensington woke up with a pounding headache in an unfamiliar bed. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came flooding back. The gala, the terrace, Isabel's face when she caught him with Olivia. He groaned and looked around. He was in Olivia's apartment, a small but trendy place in Soho that he had secretly paid for. "You're finally awake," Olivia said, walking in with 2 cups of coffee. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair messy from sleep. "You might want to see this." She handed him her phone. On the screen was Patricia Winter's article, already shared thousands of times. The headline screamed, "The betrayal heard around the world, Ethan Kensington's fall from grace." Ethan felt sick as he scrolled through the article, which detailed not just his affair with his wife's sister, but also hinted at potential trouble for Kensington Enterprises. Patricia had done her homework. The article mentioned that Isabel was not just a trophy wife, but the financial genius behind many of the company's most successful ventures. "This is bad," he muttered. "Bad? It's a disaster," Olivia said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "My phone hasn't stopped ringing. My agent called to tell me I've lost the Glamour Cosmetics campaign. They don't want to be associated with a home wrecker." Olivia was a moderately successful model who had never quite reached the heights she'd hoped for. Ethan barely heard her. He was frantically trying to call Isabel, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He tried their home number, but no one answered. Finally, he called his assistant. "Jack, thank God you answered. I need you to—" "Mr. Kensington," Jack interrupted, his voice formal. "I'm afraid I've been instructed not to assist you. I've been reassigned to work directly with Mrs. Kensington." "What? You work for me?" "Actually, sir, I'm employed by Kensington Enterprises, and Mrs. Kensington is now the acting CEO. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Mrs. Kensington is about to begin the emergency board meeting." "Emergency board meeting? What are you talking about?" "I didn't call any meeting." But Jack had already hung up. Ethan jumped out of bed and started getting dressed, cursing loudly. "What's happening?" Olivia asked, concern creeping into her voice. "I don't know, but Isabel's up to something. I need to get to the office." He tried to log into his bank account on his phone, but his password had been changed. He tried his email. Same result. A wave of panic washed over him as he realized what Isabel had meant when she said he would have nothing. "I have to go," he said, not even looking at Olivia as he rushed out the door. Outside, he couldn't find his car. He'd left it at the plaza. Last night, when he'd followed Olivia into her taxi. He cursed again and hailed a cab. "Kensington Tower, as fast as you can," he told the driver. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Hey, aren't you that guy from the news? The one who was cheating with his wife's sister?" Ethan slumped down in the seat. It was worse than he thought. At Kensington Tower, Isabel sat at the head of the conference table, dressed in a crisp white suit that made her look both powerful and unassailable. Around the table sat the 7 members of the board of directors, all looking uncomfortable, except for the 2 Isabel knew were firmly in her camp, Harold Chen and Rebecca Williams. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Isabel said, her voice steady despite having had no sleep. "As you've probably seen from the news, Kensington Enterprises is facing a potential PR crisis." "PR crisis? Isabel, this is a personal matter between you and Ethan," said William Foster, who had been Ethan's friend for years. "It's unfortunate, but it doesn't affect the company." Isabel smiled thinly. "If it were just about my husband's infidelity, you would be right, William. But there's more." She nodded to Maria Garcia, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. "What's this?" asked David Reynolds, another board member who typically sided with Ethan. "Evidence that Ethan has been misusing company funds for personal expenses," Maria said, "including an apartment for Ms. Olivia Grant, as well as jewelry, trips and other gifts totaling over $3 million in the past 6 months alone." The board members flipped through the documents with growing concern. "There's also evidence that he's been inflating projected earnings to drive up the stock price," Isabel continued. "The Cooper merger he's been promising. There is no merger. Cooper Industries pulled out weeks ago, but Ethan kept it quiet and continued to use it to attract investors. That's securities fraud," Harold Chen said, looking up from the folder with alarm. "Exactly," Isabel nodded. As CFO of this company, I cannot in good conscience allow this to continue. That's why I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Ethan Kensington as CEO and to appoint me as his replacement until we can stabilize the situation. William Foster stood up, his face red with anger. This is outrageous. You're using a personal vendetta to stage a corporate coup. Sit down, William, Rebecca Williams said sharply. These allegations are serious and well documented. If even half of them are true, we all could face liability if we don't act. I move we vote immediately, Harold said. I second, Rebecca added. Isabel looked around the table. All in favor of removing Ethan Kensington as CEO. Hands began to rise. Harold and Rebecca immediately. Then slowly, one by one, the others joined. David Reynolds was the last holdout. But finally, seeing he was alone, he raised his hand as well. The vote is unanimous, Isabel said, just as the door to the conference room burst open. Ethan stood there, disheveled and out of breath. He had been stopped at security, who no longer had him on the authorized list, but he had managed to slip past when a group of employees entered. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. The board members looked away, uncomfortable. Isabel remained, perfectly calm. Ethan, how nice of you to join us. The board has just voted to remove you as CEO effective immediately. You can't do that, he shouted. Actually, we can and we have, Harold Chen said, standing. The evidence of your financial misconduct is quite clear. What evidence? This is Mr. Kensington. The security guard who had been chasing him caught up. You need to come with me, sir. I'm not going anywhere. This is my company. Not anymore, Isabel said, standing. She walked over to him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Your access to all company accounts has been revoked. Your email has been suspended. Your office is being packed up as we speak. You will receive formal notice from our attorneys regarding the criminal investigation into your misuse of funds. Ethan stared at her, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. You wouldn't dare. I told you last night, Ethan. When the sun rose, you would have nothing. Her voice was ice. I meant it. Security, please escort Mr. Kensington out of the building, Maria called. As the guard took Ethan's arm, he jerked away. This isn't over, Isabel. Yes, Ethan, it is. She turned her back on him and addressed the board. Now shall we discuss how we're going to handle the press? Ethan was led away, shouting threats that echoed down the hallway. The employees who witnessed his exit stood in shocked silence. Many of them had already seen the news and were whispering among themselves. Back in the boardroom, Isabel showed no sign of the turmoil she felt inside. She conducted the rest of the meeting with calm authority, outlining her plan to stabilize the company and reassure investors. The board members, impressed by her composure and clear thinking, found themselves agreeing with her proposals. The press conference is scheduled for 2 p.m., she told them as the meeting concluded. I'll announce the leadership change and our plans moving forward. We'll frame it as a necessary step to protect the company from financial irregularities, not as a result of personal issues. As the board members filed out, Rebecca Williams stayed behind. Are you really okay, Isabel? She asked softly. Rebecca had been Isabel's friend for years, long before Kensington Enterprises became successful. For a moment, Isabel's mask slipped, and Rebecca saw the pain in her eyes. No, Isabel admitted, but I will be. I have to be. For the company and for myself. Rebecca squeezed her hand. You know he won't give up easily. I'm counting on it, Isabel said, her voice hardening again. In fact, I'm planning on it. Ethan stormed into his attorney's office without an appointment. Lawrence Davidson had been his lawyer for over a decade and had gotten him out of several tight spots before. She can't do this to me, Ethan raged, pacing back and forth. It's my company. I built it from nothing. Lawrence sighed. Sit down, Ethan. You're not helping yourself by losing control. Ethan collapsed into a chair. She froze all the accounts, Lawrence, even my personal ones. I can't even get into our apartment. She changed the security codes. What exactly did you expect? Lawrence asked. You were caught cheating with her sister at a very public event, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is the evidence she presented to the board. What evidence? Lawrence opened his laptop and turned it to face Ethan. This evidence, bank transfers, receipts, emails. Did you really think you could hide an affair that involved millions in company money? Ethan's face paled as he scrolled through the documents. She's been planning this for months. No, Lawrence corrected. She's been documenting your indiscretions for months. There's a difference. The question is, what do you want to do now? I want my company back. I want to destroy her for doing this to me. Lawrence shook his head. That's not a legal strategy, Ethan. And frankly, based on what I'm seeing here, you could be facing criminal charges. Your best bet might be to negotiate a settlement. Settlement? Ethan spat the word. I'm not settling. I'm fighting. With what resources? Lawrence asked bluntly. Your accounts are frozen, your reputation is in tatters, and the board has voted unanimously against you. Even I'm going to have to bill you up front if you want me to take this case. Ethan stared at him, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. So what do I do? Go home, wherever that is right now. Let me look through all of this and see if there's any angle we can work. But Ethan, Lawrence looked at him seriously. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Isabel has you cornered. At Olivia's apartment, Ethan found his suitcase packed and waiting by the door. What's this? He asked as he walked in. Olivia stood in the living room, her arms crossed. My agent called again. Not only have I lost the glamour campaign, but 3 other brands have dropped me too. My career is over, Ethan. Your career? What about my life? Isabel has taken everything. Exactly, Olivia said, her voice hard. She's taken everything from you, and she'll take everything from me too if I don't try to make amends. I'm sorry, Ethan, but you can't stay here. Are you serious? After everything I gave you? The apartment? The jewelry? The apartment. That's probably paid for with money she can trace. The jewelry that's probably bought with embezzled funds. No thanks. I've got enough problems. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. So that's it? You're just throwing me out? I'm trying to salvage what's left of my life, Olivia said. You should do the same. She opened the door and gestured to his suitcase. Goodbye, Ethan. In shock, Ethan picked up his suitcase and walked out. As the door closed behind him, he realized he had nowhere to go. His phone rang. It was his bank manager. Mr. Kensington, I'm calling about your accounts. I know, they're frozen. My wife did it. Actually, sir, they've been unfrozen, but they're empty. And your credit cards have all been maxed out. Ethan leaned against the wall in the hallway, feeling like he might collapse. What do you mean empty? The joint accounts have been emptied legally by Mrs. Kensington, who had full access. And your personal accounts show dozens of transfers over the past few months to various offshore accounts. Did you authorize those? Ethan closed his eyes. The offshore accounts had been his idea, a way to hide money from taxes and from potential business problems. He had set them up himself, thinking he was being clever. Now Isabel had used his own scheme against him. No, he lied. I didn't authorize anything. I'm afraid we'll have to report this to the authorities, sir. It looks like fraud. After hanging up, Ethan stood in the hallway of his ex-mistress's building, holding a suitcase with a few clothes and toiletries, with no money, no home, and nowhere to go. His phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened it to see Isabel, looking powerful and composed in her white suit, standing at a podium in front of Kensington Tower. Today, the board of Kensington Enterprises has appointed me as CEO following the discovery of financial irregularities under the previous leadership, she was saying to a crowd of reporters. I want to assure our investors, partners, and employees that the company remains strong and stable. We will cooperate fully with any investigation into these matters, and we look forward to a new chapter of transparent and ethical leadership. A reporter shouted a question. Mrs. Kensington, is this connected to the incident between your husband and your sister last night? Isabel's face betrayed no emotion. My personal situation and the company's leadership are separate matters. The board made its decision based solely on financial evidence. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. She walked away from the podium, ignoring the shouted questions that followed her. The camera followed her as she entered the building, the same building that Ethan had been thrown out of just hours ago. As the news clip ended, Ethan's phone died. The final insult in a day of total destruction. He sat down on his suitcase in the hallway, his head in his hands. Where had it all gone so wrong? He had thought himself so clever, juggling his wife and her sister, skimming money from the company, setting up his secret accounts. He had never imagined Isabel would find out, and if she did, he had expected tears and threats of divorce, not this calculated, complete annihilation. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. But as he sat there, a new emotion began to replace his shock and despair. Rage, pure, burning rage. Isabel thought she had beaten him, but she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Somehow he would find a way to get back everything she had taken from him, and then he would make her pay. Ethan picked up his suitcase and headed for the elevator. He had one card left to play. Michael Davis, the owner of Davis Technologies and Kensington Enterprises' biggest competitor. Michael had been trying to buy out Kensington for years. Maybe now, with inside information from the former CEO, he would finally get his chance, and Ethan would get his revenge. Michael Davis's office was the complete opposite of Ethan's former space at Kensington Tower. Where Ethan had preferred sleek, modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, Michael's office was all old money, dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors. At 50, Michael was a few years older than Ethan, with salt and pepper hair and the build of a man who still played rugby on weekends. "I have to say, this is unexpected," Michael said, leaning back in his chair as he studied Ethan's disheveled appearance. "The great Ethan Kensington coming to me for help." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had managed to borrow money from the hotel concierge to get a room for the night, promising to pay him back double. Then he'd used the hotel business center to email Michael, requesting an urgent meeting. "I wouldn't call it asking for help," Ethan said, trying to sound confident despite everything. "I'm offering you an opportunity." Michael raised an eyebrow. "An opportunity? From a man who, from what I hear, doesn't even have access to his own bank accounts. The news is all over the financial channels, Ethan. Isabel has taken over Kensington Enterprises, and the stock is actually up 2 points. Today." Ethan winced at the mention of the stock price. That meant the investors believed in Isabel more than they had in him. "That's exactly my point," Ethan pressed on. "The board thinks they're making a smart move by backing Isabel, but they don't know what I know." "And what's that?" "Kensington Enterprises is on shakier ground than anyone realizes. The Douglas project is behind schedule and over budget. The Singapore expansion is facing regulatory hurdles, and the new software division hasn't produced anything viable in over a year." Michael leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "Go on." "Isabel is good with numbers, I'll give her that. But she doesn't have the vision to lead. She doesn't have the relationships with clients and partners that I've built over years. Without me, those relationships will crumble. So what exactly are you proposing?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Help me take back my company. Provide the capital I need to fight the board's decision, and in return, I'll make sure Davis Technologies gets exclusive access to the Palmer patents." Michael's eyes widened slightly. The Palmer patents were among Kensington's most valuable assets, a series of innovations in artificial intelligence that many tech companies were desperate to license. "You don't have the authority to offer those patents," Michael pointed out. "Not yet," Ethan admitted. "But when I get back control of the company, I will." Michael studied him for a long moment. "You really think you can win against Isabel? She seems to have outmaneuvered you at every turn." "She caught me off guard," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "It won't happen again. And she doesn't know about my backup plan." This was a bluff. Ethan had no backup plan. But he needed Michael to believe he had an ace up his sleeve. Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "$5 million, he said finally. "I'll transfer it to an account no one can trace back to me. You'll have access to it through a third party. In exchange, I want first rights to the Palmer patents if you regain control. Plus 10% of Kensington Enterprises." 5%, Ethan countered automatically. Michael turned to look at him. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Ethan. 8%, and that's my final offer." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "Fine, 8%. And one more thing, Michael added. I know about the offshore accounts. If you try to double-cross me, those accounts will be the least of your worries. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. How did Michael know about those? Had Isabel been talking to him? Before he could ask, Michael was calling his assistant to draw up the paperwork. We'll have everything ready for you to sign this afternoon, Michael said. In the meantime, you might want to get yourself cleaned up. You look like hell. Ethan forced a smile. Thank you, Michael. You won't regret this. As he left Davis Technologies, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and unease. He had the money he needed to start fighting back, but at what cost? And what did Michael know that he wasn't saying? Isabel sat alone in what had been Ethan's office, now hers. The day had been a whirlwind of meetings, press interviews, and calls with nervous investors. She had handled it all with the composure everyone now expected of her, but inside she was exhausted. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maria Garcia carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought you could use this, Maria said, setting 1 cup on the desk. It's been quite a day. Isabel smiled gratefully. That's an understatement. Maria sat down across from her. The board is impressed with how you've handled everything. The stock price is up, the employees are calm, and even the press seems to be on your side. For now, Isabel said, but we both know this is just the beginning. Ethan won't go down without a fight. Let him try, Maria said with a shrug. You've frozen his assets, removed his access, and documented his financial misconduct. What can he possibly do? Isabel took a sip of her coffee. Never underestimate a desperate man, Maria, especially one as proud as Ethan. Has he tried to contact you? Dozens of calls and texts. I haven't responded to any of them. And Olivia? Isabel's expression hardened at the mention of her sister. She called once, left a voicemail full of tears and apologies, said she didn't mean for it to happen, that Ethan pursued her. Do you believe her? It doesn't matter what I believe. The damage is done. Isabel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the New York skyline. The funny thing is, I always thought if Ethan ever cheated, it would be with some young model or an intern, not my own sister. Maria joined her at the window. What will you do now? About the company, I mean? We proceed with the expansion as planned, but we do it right. No more of Ethan's corner cutting or inflated projections. We show the world that Kensington Enterprises is stronger without him. And personally? Isabel was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. Right now, I'm just trying to get through each day. Before Maria could respond, Isabel's phone rang. It was Rebecca Williams. Isabel, have you seen the news? Rebecca asked without preamble. Which news? I've been in meetings all afternoon. Turn on CNBC, now. Isabel grabbed the remote and turned on the large TV on the wall. There was Ethan, looking refreshed and confident in a new suit, standing next to Michael Davis at a press conference. Mr. Kensington, can you comment on the allegations of financial misconduct? A reporter was asking. Ethan smiled smoothly. Those allegations are completely false, and part of a calculated attempt by my wife to take control of Kensington Enterprises following our personal difficulties. I have documentation proving that all financial transactions were approved by the board, including by Mrs. Kensington herself. What about your relationship with Olivia Grant, your wife's sister? That's a private matter, Ethan said, his expression becoming serious. But I will say that my personal life has been used against me in an unfair and vindictive way. I'm here today with Mr. Davis to announce a new partnership that will benefit both our companies and expose the truth about what's really happening at Kensington Enterprises. Isabel felt her blood run cold. A partnership with Davis Technologies? That could only mean one thing. Ethan had found a way to fund his counterattack. Michael Davis stepped forward. Davis Technologies is proud to support Mr. Kensington during this difficult time. We believe in his vision and leadership, and we look forward to working together. What exactly does this partnership entail? Another reporter asked. The details will be announced in the coming days, Michael replied. But I can tell you that it represents a significant investment in the future of both companies. Isabel muted the TV and turned to Maria, her face pale. He found backing, and not just from anyone. From our biggest competitor. But how? All his accounts are frozen and we've alerted all the major banks about the potential fraud. No one should be lending him money. Michael Davis doesn't need banks, Isabel said grimly. He has more than enough personal wealth to fund whatever Ethan promised him. And what did Ethan promise? He doesn't have anything to offer. That's what we need to find out. Isabel picked up her phone and called James Wilson, her lawyer. James, I need you to look into any recent communications between Ethan and Michael Davis, and I want to know exactly what Ethan meant when he said he has documentation proving the board approved his financial transactions. After hanging up, Isabel sat back down at her desk, her mind racing. Maria, call an emergency meeting with the security team. I want a complete audit of all our systems. If Ethan still has access to any company files or servers, I want to know about it. Maria nodded and hurried out. Alone again, Isabel rewound the news segment and watched Ethan's confident smile as he stood next to Michael Davis. Something wasn't right. Ethan looked too sure of himself for someone who had lost everything just 24 hours ago. Her phone rang again, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello, Isabel. It was Olivia's voice, but different somehow, less tearful, more controlled. What do you want, Olivia? To warn you, Ethan is not who you think he is. There are things you don't know. I think I know exactly who he is now, Isabel said coldly. And you're the last person I'd trust for information. I understand why you feel that way, Olivia said. But this isn't about me or us. It's about Ethan and what he's been hiding. He's dangerous, Isabel. Dangerous? That's a bit dramatic even for you. Is it? Did you know he's been meeting with people from Geneva Capital? Isabel froze. Geneva Capital was a private equity firm known for hostile takeovers. If Ethan was talking to them. When? She demanded. For months. Long before. What happened between us? I overheard him on the phone once talking about a backup plan if things went south with the company. Why are you telling me this? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Because despite what you think, I never wanted to hurt you. What happened with Ethan, it wasn't planned. He pursued me, made me feel special. By the time I realized what was happening, I was in too deep. Save your excuses, Isabel snapped. If you have actual information about Ethan's plans, tell me. Otherwise, we have nothing to discuss. Check his personal email, Olivia said quickly, before Isabel could hang up. The one he uses for non-business communications. The password is Olivia, 1988. Isabel's stomach turned at the thought that her husband's password was her sister's name and birth year. How convenient that you know his password. Like I said, I'm trying to help. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. With that, Olivia hung up. Isabel stared at the phone, torn between anger and curiosity. Could she trust anything Olivia said? Probably not. But the mention of Geneva Capital was specific enough to be worth checking out. She opened her laptop and tried to access Ethan's personal email using the password Olivia had given her. To her surprise, it worked. She was in most of the recent emails were from her. Unanswered messages asking where he was, why he was late, when he'd be home. She scrolled further back and found what she was looking for. A series of emails between Ethan and someone named Mark Schaefer at Geneva Capital. The emails were vague, discussing a potential restructuring opportunity and a contingency plan for Kensington Enterprises. The last email, dated just a week ago, mentioned a meeting scheduled for next month to finalize the details. Isabel sat back, her mind racing. Was Ethan planning to sell the company without telling her? Or was this something worse, a plan to force her out if she ever discovered his affair? She forwarded the emails to herself and logged out. Then she called Rebecca Williams. Rebecca, I need to meet with you and Harold Chen immediately. There's something you both need to see. Vice Ethan left the press conference feeling better than he had in days. The look on the reporters' faces when he and Michael had walked in together had been priceless, and the announcement of their partnership had been deliberately vague enough to set off alarm bells for Isabel without giving away his real plan. Now sitting in the back of Michael's limousine, he was starting to feel like his old self again. That went well, he said, loosening his tie. The suit he was wearing was new, bought with the first installment of Michael's money. "Don't get ahead of yourself," Michael cautioned. "All we did was announce a partnership that doesn't actually exist yet. The real work starts now." I know, Ethan assured him. "But this was an important first step. Isabel needs to know she hasn't beaten me." Michael looked at him curiously. "You really hate her now, don't you? Wouldn't you hate someone who took everything from you? She's still your wife." "Not for long," Ethan said grimly. "Once I get control of the company back, the first thing I'm doing is filing for divorce." "And your girlfriend, her sister, where does she fit into all this?" Ethan shrugged. "Olivia served her purpose. She was fun while it lasted, but she made it clear she's not interested in standing by me now that things are difficult." Michael nodded thoughtfully. Women can be fickle that way. What Ethan didn't mention was the text he'd sent to Olivia just before the press conference. "Watch the news. I'm back in the game. You chose the wrong side." He was satisfied when she didn't respond. Let her worry about what he might do. "So what's our next move?" he asked Michael. "We need to talk to the board members individually, find their weak spots." "Their price. Everyone has one." "William Foster and David Reynolds will be the easiest," Ethan said. "They've always supported me. The challenge will be Harold Chen and Rebecca Williams. They're firmly in Isabel's camp." "Leave them to me," Michael said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've known Harold for years. We have a history." The limousine pulled up in front of a luxury hotel. Michael had arranged a suite for Ethan as part of their agreement. "Get some rest," Michael advised. "Tomorrow we start picking off the board members one by one." As Ethan got out of the car, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email alert from his personal account. Someone had logged in from an unfamiliar device. He smiled to himself. Isabel had taken the bait. The personal email account was a decoy, set up months ago when he'd first started seeing Olivia. He had deliberately left a trail of emails to Geneva Capital, knowing that if Isabel ever discovered the affair, she would look for evidence of other betrayals. The Geneva Capital emails were convincing, but ultimately led nowhere. The real plan was much more straightforward. With Michael's money and influence, Ethan would buy out the board members who could be bought, pressure the ones who couldn't, and eventually force a new vote. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. And once he was back in control, he would dismantle everything Isabel had built piece by piece. As he entered the hotel lobby, Ethan felt his phone vibrate again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "I know about Singapore. We need to talk." Ethan froze, his blood running cold. Singapore? No one knew about Singapore except he quickly deleted the text and looked around the lobby, suddenly paranoid. Who had sent that? And how did they know? The Singapore project wasn't just behind schedule, as he'd told Michael. It was a complete fabrication. There was no expansion, no regulatory hurdles. The money allocated for the project had been diverted to one of his offshore accounts. It was the largest of his financial schemes, and the one that would send him to prison if it ever came to light. Ethan hurried to the elevator, trying to calm his racing heart. Someone was trying to rattle him. That's all. It could be Isabel guessing at his secrets, or maybe one of the board members who had discovered something. Whoever it was, he couldn't let it distract him from his plan. But as the elevator doors closed, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was another player in this game, someone he hadn't counted on. Isabel sat in her new apartment, a sleek modern space in a secure building downtown. She had moved in yesterday, bringing only what she needed from the penthouse she had shared with Ethan. The place was still mostly empty, but it didn't matter. It was a fresh start. Rebecca and Harold had been shocked by the emails from Geneva Capital, but not entirely surprised. They had suspected for some time that Ethan was making plans without the board's knowledge. "This changes things," Harold had said. "If he was planning to sell to Geneva Capital, who knows what else he was hiding?" "We need to dig deeper into all his communications," Rebecca had added, "and we need to protect ourselves. Geneva Capital has a reputation for aggressive tactics." Now alone in her new home, Isabel tried to make sense of it all. The affair with Olivia, the financial misconduct, the secret meetings with Geneva Capital, and now the alliance with Michael Davis. It was as if Ethan had been living a completely different life beneath the surface of their marriage. Her phone rang. It was James Wilson, her lawyer. "I've looked into the Davis connection," he said without preamble. "It's worse than we thought. Michael Davis has transferred $5 million to an offshore account that we believe Ethan can access." $5 million? Isabel repeated. What? Could Ethan have promised him that's worth that kind of investment? That's the concerning part. Based on a preliminary investigation, we believe Ethan may have offered him the Palmer patents. Isabel sat up straight. He can't do that. Those patents belong to the company, not to him personally. Legally, you're right. But if he manages to regain control of Kensington Enterprises, he won't, Isabel said firmly. We won't let that happen. There's something else, James said, his voice dropping. We've uncovered some irregularities with the Singapore expansion. According to the records, significant funds were allocated to that project, but there's no evidence of any actual work being done. Isabel frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying that Ethan may have been diverting company funds on a much larger scale than we initially thought. We're talking potential criminal charges, Isabel. After hanging up, Isabel walked to the window of her new apartment. The city lights twinkled in the darkness, so beautiful and so indifferent to the chaos of human lives. She had thought she knew Ethan, had believed in their partnership, both personal and professional. Now she wondered if any of it had been real. Had he always been planning to betray her in every possible way? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The Singapore project is the key. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. Central Park Boathouse. Isabel stared at the message, her heart pounding. Who was this? And how did they know about Singapore, which she had only just learned about herself? It could be a trap. Ethan might be trying to lure her out, away from the safety of her office and her allies. But it could also be someone with inside information, someone who could help her understand the full extent of Ethan's deception. After a moment's hesitation, she texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "A friend. Someone who knows. Ethan better than you think. Come alone." Isabel put the phone down, her mind racing. Should she go, it could be dangerous. But if there was information about Singapore that could protect the company and potentially put Ethan away for good, didn't she owe it to herself to find out? She made her decision. She would go, but not alone. She would bring security, and she would be prepared for anything. Little did she know that across town in his hotel suite, Ethan was making plans of his own for tomorrow. Plans that would change everything once again. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Central Park was crowded with tourists and locals enjoying the spring afternoon. Isabel arrived at the boathouse 20 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of all entrances. She wore large sunglasses and a scarf over her hair, a weak disguise, but better than nothing. Since the gala night, her face had been in every newspaper and on every news channel. Being recognized in public was the last thing she needed right now. She had followed her instincts and come alone, though not without precautions. Maria knew where she was and would call the police if she didn't check in within an hour. And in her purse was a small canister of pepper spray, a gift from Rebecca, who had insisted she carry it at all times. "Mrs. Kensington, or do you prefer Grant now?" Isabel looked up to see a woman in her early 30s standing beside her table. She was slim, professionally dressed, with short blonde hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "I'm keeping Kensington, at least for now," Isabel replied cautiously. "And you are?" The woman sat down without being invited. "Jennifer Lane. I worked for your husband at Kensington Enterprises until 6 months ago." Isabel tried to place her. "You were in finance, special projects, reporting directly to Ethan." Jennifer's voice hardened slightly when she said his name. "He fired me when I started asking too many questions about Singapore. So this was her mysterious texter." Isabel studied Jennifer's face, looking for signs of deception. "Why should I trust anything you have to say about Ethan or Singapore?" Jennifer reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, placing it on the table between them. "Because I have proof. Financial records, emails, meeting notes, everything that shows. Singapore isn't just a failed project. It's fraud on a massive scale." Isabel looked at the flash drive but didn't touch it. Why not go to the authorities? I tried. Filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC 3 months ago. But Ethan has friends in high places. The investigation was shut down before it started. So why come to me now? Because now you have the power to do something about it. Jennifer leaned forward. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm not the only one Ethan has hurt. When he fired me, he blacklisted me in the industry. I haven't been able to find work since. I want justice. Isabel finally picked up the flash drive. What exactly will I find on this? Evidence that there never was a Singapore expansion. The $70 million allocated to that project over the past year was diverted to a series of shell companies. And from there, Jennifer paused. Well, that's where it gets interesting. Some of it went to personal accounts in the Caymans, but most of it went to a company called Red Diamond Investments. I've never heard of them. Few people have. They operate very quietly, making strategic investments in tech companies around the world. But if you dig deep enough, you'll find that Red Diamond is ultimately controlled by Michael Davis. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying Ethan was embezzling company funds to help our biggest competitor? That's exactly what I'm saying. Ethan and Michael have been working together for over a year. The public rivalry, the competing bids for contracts, it was all for show. Jennifer looked around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. But there's more. Red Diamond's investments have been focused on one area, artificial intelligence, the same field as your Palmer patents. Isabel's mind raced as she tried to process this information. If what Jennifer was saying was true, Ethan hadn't just been stealing from the company. He had been actively working against its interests, helping their biggest competitor gain an advantage in AI technology. Why would he do this? What does he gain? A backup plan, Jennifer said simply. If Kensington Enterprises ever failed, or if he lost control of it, he'd have a position waiting for him at Davis Technologies with a significant stake in their AI division. It was his insurance policy. And now that I've taken control of the company, he's activating that insurance policy. But he needs to regain control of Kensington first to make sure the connection to Singapore is never discovered. Isabel slipped the flash drive into her purse, her mind already formulating a plan. Thank you for this, Jennifer. But I have to ask, why didn't you come to me sooner, before all of this happened? Jennifer looked down at her hands. I tried. 3 times I called your office, asking to speak with you about an urgent matter concerning your husband. Each time I was told you were too busy. Isabel remembered those messages, vague requests for meetings about confidential company matters. She had assumed they were from people seeking jobs or investments and had told her assistant to handle them. I'm sorry, she said sincerely. I should have taken those calls. It doesn't matter now, Jennifer said, standing up. What matters is what you do with that information. She handed Isabel a business card. My number's on there if you have questions about the files, but be careful. If Ethan finds out you have this, he won't hesitate to strike back. As Jennifer walked away, Isabel sat at the table, turning the flash drive over in her hands. This could be the evidence she needed to put Ethan away for good. But it could also be a trap. She decided she would review the files with James Wilson before making any moves. If they were legitimate, they would take them to the SEC and the district attorney immediately. As she stood to leave, she noticed a familiar figure watching her from across the boathouse. Olivia. Her sister quickly looked away when their eyes met, but it was too late. Isabel marched over to her. Are you following me now? Olivia looked nervous. I need to talk to you, Belle. It's important. I have nothing to say to you. And don't call me Belle. Only family and close friends use that nickname, and Olivia no longer qualified as either. Please, Olivia begged. It's about Ethan. He's been calling me, threatening me. Isabel felt a flash of worry despite herself. Whatever Olivia had done, she was still her sister. Threatening you how? He says if I help you in any way, he'll release pictures. Private pictures he took without my knowledge. Olivia's voice broke. My career is already ruined. If those pictures get out, I'll never work again. Isabel studied her sister's face, trying to decide if this was just another manipulation. What does he think you can help me with? I don't know. But he's paranoid. He thinks I know things, secrets about his business that I could tell you. Do you? Olivia hesitated. I overheard calls, meetings, names like Singapore and Red Diamond. I didn't understand what they meant, but I knew they were important to him. So Jennifer's information was corroborated, at least partially. Isabel felt a mix of emotions: anger at her sister's betrayal, concern for her safety, and a growing determination to stop Ethan. "Where are you staying?" she asked finally. "A motel in Queens. It's all I can afford now." Olivia looked down, embarrassed. "The landlord of the apartment Ethan was paying for kicked me out when the check stopped," Isabel sighed. Despite everything, she couldn't leave her sister in a motel in Queens, especially if Ethan was threatening her. "I have a spare room in my new place. You can stay there until you figure out what to do next." Olivia looked up, surprised. "Really, after everything?" "Don't mistake this for forgiveness," Isabel said firmly. "This is about protecting you from Ethan, nothing more. And in return, I want you to tell me everything. You know about his business dealings, everything." Olivia nodded quickly. "Of course, thank you, Isabel. There's one more condition. You will give a sworn statement to my lawyer about your relationship with Ethan, when it started, what he said about me, about the company, everything." Olivia paled. "If that gets out publicly?" "It won't, unless we need it for court." Isabel's voice was hard. "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." After a moment's hesitation, Olivia agreed. "I'll do whatever you need me to." As they left the boathouse together, Isabel couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake. Trusting Olivia again seemed foolish after such a devastating betrayal. But if her sister's information could help bring down Ethan, perhaps it was worth the risk. Ethan paced the floor of his hotel suite, checking his watch every few minutes. His contact should have called by now with information about Isabel's meeting at the boathouse. Had something gone wrong? His phone finally rang, and he answered immediately. "What happened?" "She met with Jennifer Lane," the voice on the other. End reported. They talked for about 15 minutes. Lane gave her something, looked like a flash drive. Ethan cursed under his breath. Jennifer Lane was the last person he wanted talking to Isabel. What happened after that? Something unexpected. Olivia Grant showed up. The sisters had what looked like a tense conversation, then left together. Together? Are you sure? Positive. They got into the same taxi. Ethan ended the call and threw his phone onto the bed in frustration. Jennifer Lane with her evidence about Singapore was bad enough. But Olivia and Isabel joining forces? That could be disastrous. He needed to move. Faster. The board meeting was still 3 days away. Too much time for Isabel to act on whatever information Jennifer had given her. He picked up his phone again and called Michael Davis. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Jennifer Lane has made contact with Isabel." There was a pause on the other end. "The woman you fired, the one who was asking questions about Singapore?" "Yes, and she's given Isabel information, probably those financial records she copied before I caught her." "That is a problem," Michael agreed. "If Isabel takes those to the authorities..." "Exactly. We need to move up our timeline. How quickly can you arrange a meeting with the remaining board members?" "I had planned to approach them individually, but under the circumstances, a group meeting might be better. I could have it set for tomorrow morning." "Do it," Ethan ordered. "And there's one more complication. Olivia is with Isabel now." "Your former mistress is with your wife." Michael sounded amused. "That must be an awkward reunion." "It's not funny. Michael, Olivia might have overheard things when she was with me. Things about Singapore, about Red Diamond. Then we need to make sure she doesn't share that information." Michael's voice lost its amused tone. "I'll handle it. Just focus on convincing the board members tomorrow." After hanging up, Ethan tried to calm his racing thoughts. Everything was unraveling faster than he had anticipated. He'd always known that Singapore was his greatest vulnerability, a massive fraud that could send him to prison for years. But he had been careful, covering his tracks, using shell companies and offshore accounts to hide the money trail. Jennifer Lane had been the only one who had gotten close to the truth, and he thought he had neutralized her by firing her and blacklisting her in the industry. He should have known she would find another way to expose him. And now there was Olivia to worry about as well. He had threatened her with those photos to keep her quiet, but it seemed she had decided that aligning with Isabel was her best protection. Ethan poured himself a whiskey from the hotel minibar and walked to the window. The New York skyline reminded him of everything he had built and everything he stood to lose. But he wasn't beaten yet, not even close. Tomorrow's meeting with the board would be his chance to turn the tide. And if Michael could handle the Olivia situation as promised, Jennifer Lane's evidence might not matter. Ethan raised his glass to his reflection in the window. They still don't know who they're dealing with, he told himself. Not Isabel, not Olivia, not any of them. Somehow, Isabel's new apartment was spacious but sparsely furnished. She had only brought the essentials from the penthouse, planning to buy new furniture when she had time. Now, watching Olivia look around the nearly empty living room, she felt oddly self-conscious. "It's temporary," she explained, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter. "I haven't had time to properly furnish it yet." "It's nice," Olivia said, clearly trying to be polite. "Very minimalist." Isabel ignored the comment. "The guest room is down the hall on the right, bathrooms across from it. Make yourself comfortable while I make some calls." Olivia nodded and headed in that direction with her small suitcase. Isabel waited until she heard the guest room door close before taking out her phone and the flash drive Jennifer had given her. She called James Wilson first. "James, I need you to come to my apartment as soon as possible. I have information about Singapore that you need to see." Then she called Maria. "I need security for my apartment building, discreet but effective. And I need it tonight." Finally, she called Rebecca. "Cancel any plans you have for this evening. I'm calling an emergency meeting at my place, 9 o'clock. With those arrangements made, Isabel inserted the flash drive into her laptop. The files were organized methodically. Financial records in one folder, emails in another, meeting notes in a third. Jennifer Lane had been thorough. Isabel started with the financial records. They showed exactly what Jennifer had described. $70 million allocated to the Singapore expansion project, but instead of being used for office space, staff, and equipment in Singapore, the money had been diverted through a complex network of shell companies. And at the end of that network was Red Diamond Investments. Next, she opened the email folder. These were even more damning. Exchanges between Ethan and Michael Davis going back over a year, discussing their arrangement and the Singapore strategy. In one particularly incriminating email, Ethan had written, "Once the Palmer patents are fully developed, we'll move them to RD as discussed. Kensington gets the credit publicly, but Davis gets the actual technology. Win-win." The meeting notes were equally revealing. Detailed accounts of secret meetings between Ethan and Michael, often in hotel rooms or private dining rooms where they had planned their strategy. Jennifer had apparently been present for many of these meetings as Ethan's special projects manager, tasked with handling the logistics of their arrangement. By the time Isabel finished reviewing the files, she felt physically ill. The betrayal went so much deeper than she had imagined. Ethan hadn't just cheated on her with her sister. He had been systematically undermining their company, stealing its most valuable assets, and planning to jump ship to their competitor. The YM intercom buzzed and she went to answer it. James Wilson had arrived. She buzzed him up, then knocked on the guest room door. "Olivia, my lawyer is here. I need you to come out and tell him everything you know about Ethan's business dealings." There was no response. Isabel knocked again, harder this time. "Olivia." Still nothing. She tried the door and found it unlocked. The room was empty. The window was open and Olivia was gone. Isabel rushed to check her purse on the kitchen counter. The flash drive was still in her laptop, but her phone was missing. She ran back to the guest room and looked around frantically. There on the bed was a note in Olivia's handwriting. "I'm sorry, Belle. He says he'll hurt Mom if I don't help him. I had no choice. Forgive me." Isabel sank onto the bed. The note crumpled in her hand. She had been betrayed by her sister again. And this time, Olivia had taken her phone, with all her contacts, emails, and messages, including the texts from Jennifer Lane. The doorbell rang, and Isabel went to let James in, her mind racing. She needed to warn Jennifer immediately. If Ethan found out where she was, "James, we have a serious problem." she said as soon as he entered. "My sister has stolen my phone and is working with Ethan, and I have evidence that could put them both in prison." Olivia sat in the back of a taxi, her hands shaking as she scrolled through Isabel's phone. She had found what Ethan wanted, the texts from Jennifer Lane, including her phone number on the business card. She had also taken photos of the files on the flash drive before leaving. She felt sick about what she had done. When she had gone to see Isabel at the boathouse, she had genuinely wanted to make amends, to help her sister against Ethan. But then she had received his text with a photo of their mother's house in Connecticut, and the message, "I know where she lives alone, help me, or she'll have an unfortunate accident." Olivia had never imagined Ethan could be so cruel, so calculating. But the threat against their mother, a 65-year-old widow who lived alone, had terrified her into action. "Where to, miss?" the taxi driver asked, pulling away from Isabel's building. Olivia hesitated. She was supposed to take the information to Ethan at his hotel. But something inside her rebelled at the thought of helping him again, even under duress. "Bryant Park, please," she said finally. She needed time to think, to figure out a way out of this impossible situation. As the taxi drove through the city, Olivia's phone, her own phone, rang. It was Ethan. "Do you have it?" he asked without greeting. "Yes," she answered quietly. "Good. Bring it to me now. I'm on my way." The lie came easily. "Don't even think about double-crossing me, Olivia. Remember, what's at stake." "I know what's at stake," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "But threatening my mother, that's low even for you, Ethan." "I do what I have to do, just like you." He hung up. Olivia stared at Isabel's phone in her hand. If she gave this to Ethan, he would use it to find Jennifer Lane. And based on what she had seen in those files, Jennifer had evidence that could destroy Ethan, and possibly Michael Davis too. What would he do to Jennifer to keep her quiet? The taxi pulled up at Bryant Park. Olivia paid the driver and got out, finding a bench where she could sit and think. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the park. She had three choices: give Ethan what he wanted, and potentially be complicit in whatever he planned for Jennifer. Go back to Isabel, confess everything, and hope her sister could protect their mother, or find a third option. A memory suddenly surfaced, something she had overheard during one of Ethan's late-night calls. He had been angry, shouting at someone about a problem with the Singapore accounts. "If the SEC gets wind of this, we're both finished," he had said. "Make sure those records disappear permanently. The Securities and Exchange Commission." Of course, Olivia took out her own phone again, but instead of calling Ethan back, she looked up the SEC's whistleblower hotline. Jennifer had tried this route before and been shut down, but that was when Ethan was still powerful, still the CEO of Kensington Enterprises. Now, with his reputation in tatters and Isabel in control of the company, things might be different. Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed the number. "SEC Whistleblower Office," a voice answered. "My name is Olivia Grant," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I have information about securities fraud at Kensington Enterprises and Davis Technologies, and I need protection." The person on the other end immediately became more attentive. "Can you be more specific about the nature of the fraud, Ms. Grant?" "Embezzlement, misappropriation of company funds, secret agreements between competitors, manipulation of stock prices." Olivia took a deep breath. "And I have documents to prove it." "Where are you now, Ms. Grant? We can send someone to meet you immediately." Olivia looked around the park, suddenly paranoid. Could Ethan be having her followed? "I don't feel safe staying in one place. Can I come to your office?" "Of course. I'll alert security to expect you." 20 minutes later, Olivia was sitting in a secure conference room at the SEC offices with two serious-looking agents across from her. She had handed over Isabel's phone with the texts from Jennifer, explained about the flash drive with the evidence, and told them everything she knew about Ethan's dealings with Michael Davis. "We'll need a formal statement," one of the agents, Agent Rodriguez, told her. "And we'll want to speak with your sister and Ms. Lane as well." "My sister doesn't know I'm here," Olivia admitted. I stole her phone and ran. Ethan was threatening our mother. Agent Rodriguez nodded. We can arrange protection for your mother immediately. And for you if you're willing to testify. I am, Olivia said, surprising herself with her certainty. I want to make this right. There's one more thing you should know. The other agent, Agent Miller, said, we've had Kensington Enterprises on our radar for some time. Ms. Lane's complaint wasn't dismissed. It was incorporated into a larger investigation. But we needed more evidence and more witnesses. You believe me? Olivia asked, almost not, daring to hope. Your information matches what we already had from other sources, Agent Rodriguez confirmed. This could be the break we've been waiting for. For the first time in months, Olivia felt something like peace. She had made terrible mistakes, hurt the person she loved most in the world, and nearly ruined her own life in the process. But maybe, just maybe, she could still do something right. What happens now? She asked. Now, Agent Miller said, standing up, we move quickly, before Mr. Kensington and Mr. Davis realize what's happening. Ethan checked his watch for the 5th time in an hour. Olivia should have been here by now. What was taking her so long? He tried calling her again, but her phone went straight to voicemail. A sense of unease began to creep over him. Had she lost her nerve? Gone back to Isabel? His hotel room phone rang, startling him. Mr. Kensington, there's a Michael Davis here to see you. Send him up, Ethan said, puzzled. They weren't supposed to meet until tomorrow before the board meeting. Minutes later, Michael strode into the suite without waiting for Ethan to open the door. His face was tense. We have a problem, Michael said, closing the door firmly behind him. A big one. What now? Ethan asked, his patience wearing thin. I just got a call from my contact at the SEC. They're reopening the investigation into Singapore. They have new evidence. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Isabel, she must have gone to them with Jennifer Lane's files. So it's worse than that, Michael said, pouring himself a drink from the minibar without asking. The tip came from Olivia Grant. Olivia? Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. But she's supposed to be bringing me Isabel's phone, right? Now? Well, she took a detour to the SEC instead. And she's not just talking about Singapore, she's telling them about Red Diamond, about our arrangement, everything. Ethan sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. We're finished. Not necessarily, Michael said, his voice suddenly calm. We just need to accelerate our contingency plan. What contingency plan? The board meeting? That's pointless now. If the SEC is involved, not the board meeting, Michael interrupted. Plan B. Ethan looked up, confused. There is no plan B. Michael smiled thinly. There's always a plan B, Ethan. You just didn't need to know about it until now. He took out his phone and made a call. It's Davis. Initiate Protocol 7. Yes. Now. He hung up and turned back to Ethan. Pack your things, we're leaving. Leaving? For where? Somewhere without an extradition treaty. I have a private jet waiting at Teterboro. We can be in the air within the hour. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. You want me to run? Leave everything behind? It's that or prison, Michael said bluntly. Your choice. But I'm not going down with you, Ethan. I've been planning for this. Possibility for months. The reality of the situation finally hit Ethan like a physical blow. This was really happening. His life as he knew it was over. No company, no wife, no lover, no home. Just a hasty escape in the night like a common criminal. How much time do we have? He asked, his voice hollow. Not much. My contact says they're preparing to move on us tonight. We need to be gone before then. Ethan nodded and began throwing his few possessions into his suitcase. As he packed, a bitter thought occurred to him. You knew this might happen. You've been preparing for it. Did you ever really believe in our partnership, or was I just a useful tool? Michael laughed, a cold sound without humor. Oh, I believed in the partnership. It was quite profitable while it lasted. But in business, Ethan, you always have to be prepared for failure. And what about Singapore, the Palmer patents, all of it? Singapore served its purpose. It funneled millions to Red Diamond, which has already used that money to develop AI technology that will make the Palmer patents obsolete. And when Kensington Enterprises collapses under the weight of the scandal, which it will once the full extent of your fraud is exposed, Davis Technologies will be there to pick up the pieces, at a very favorable price. Ethan felt a surge of rage. You planned this all along. You wanted Kensington to fail. Not initially, Michael admitted. Initially, I was content with our arrangement. But when the opportunity presented itself, when I saw how reckless you were being with Olivia, how you were losing control, I adapted. That's what successful businessmen do, Ethan. They adapt. Ethan wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face, but what would be the point? Michael had outplayed him just as Isabel had. Everyone had seen his weaknesses and exploited them. What about Isabel? He asked suddenly. Will she be implicated? Does it matter? You hate her now, don't you? Ethan wasn't sure how to answer that. Did he hate Isabel? He had certainly been furious with her for taking his company, his position, his dignity. But now, facing the consequences of his own actions, he found it hard to maintain that anger. She didn't know anything about Singapore, he said finally, or Red Diamond. That was all me. How noble of you to worry about her now, Michael said with a smirk, but it's too late for gallantry. The board will be implicated. The company will be under investigation for years, and Isabel will be fighting to save what's left of Kensington Enterprises. Whether she knew or not is irrelevant. Ethan finished packing and closed his suitcase. Let's go. As they headed for the door, Ethan took one last look around the hotel suite. This was the end of his life in New York. His life as Ethan Kensington, successful businessman and husband to Isabel. What awaited him now was exile, disgrace, and a partnership with a man he suddenly realized he couldn't trust. But what choice did he have? They were halfway to the elevator when Ethan's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made him answer. Ethan Kensington? A woman's voice asked. Yes? Who is this? Agent Rodriguez with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have some questions for you regarding Kensington Enterprises and a project called Singapore. Ethan looked at Michael, who was frantically gesturing for him to hang up. I'm afraid I'm busy at the moment, Ethan said, following Michael toward the stairs instead of the elevator. Mr. Kensington, we're currently in the lobby of your hotel, Agent Rodriguez continued calmly. Agents are also at all exits. I strongly suggest you cooperate rather than attempt to flee. That would only make things worse for you. Ethan stopped walking. You're in the lobby? Yes, sir, along with agents from the FBI, given the interstate nature of the fraud we're investigating. Michael had reached the stairwell door and was holding it open, urging Ethan to hurry. But Ethan stood frozen, the phone to his ear. Mr. Kensington, are you still there? In that moment, Ethan made a decision. Maybe the last independent decision he would make for a long time. I'll be down in 5 minutes, he told Agent Rodriguez, and I want to make a deal. What are you doing? Michael hissed as Ethan hung up and turned back toward the elevator. Cutting my losses, Ethan replied. The SEC and FBI are downstairs. They know everything. Running will only make it worse. They can't know everything, Michael insisted. Not without proof. Not without someone on the inside confirming it. Ethan smiled grimly. That's exactly what I'm going to give them. Confirmation from the inside. About Singapore, about Red Diamond, about our arrangement. Everything. Michael's face darkened with fury. You wouldn't dare! Watch me. Ethan pressed the elevator button. You said it yourself, Michael. Successful businessmen adapt. This is me adapting. As the elevator doors opened, Michael grabbed Ethan's arm. If you do this, you're finished. No one will ever trust you again. I'm already finished, Ethan said, pulling away. But I can decide how I go down, and I'd rather go down telling the truth than running like a coward. He stepped into the elevator and watched Michael's furious face disappear as the doors closed. As the elevator descended, Ethan felt an odd sense of calm come over him. He had lost everything. His company, his wife, his freedom. But in this final act, he could at least reclaim a small piece of his dignity. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could make amends for some of the damage he had done. When the elevator reached the lobby, Ethan stepped out to find a group of serious-looking men and women in suits waiting for him. At their center was a tall woman with short, dark hair who stepped forward. Mr. Kensington, I'm Agent Rodriguez. Thank you for cooperating. I want to make a statement, Ethan said. About Michael Davis and our arrangement. About Singapore and Red Diamond, all of it. Agent Rodriguez looked surprised but nodded. "We'd be very interested in hearing that statement, sir." As they led him out of the hotel, Ethan caught a glimpse of Olivia sitting in the lobby speaking with another agent. She looked up as he passed, her eyes wide with surprise that he wasn't running. He gave her a small nod. Not forgiveness, it was too late for that, but acknowledgement. They had both made terrible mistakes, hurt people who trusted them, and now they were both trying, in their own ways, to make it right. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Isabel stood in her kitchen, staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. The breaking news headlines seemed impossible. Kensington and Davis in custody. SEC uncovers massive fraud scheme. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since the story broke an hour ago. Board members, employees, investors, reporters, everyone wanted to know what was happening, but Isabel had no answers for them. She was as shocked as anyone. James Wilson had been with her when the news broke, reviewing Jennifer Lane's evidence and preparing to take it to the authorities themselves. Now that plan was obsolete. "This changes everything," James said, reading the article over her shoulder. "According to this, both Ethan and Michael Davis are cooperating with investigators, and the tip came from your sister, Olivia." Isabel couldn't hide her surprise. After finding the note and realizing Olivia had stolen her phone, she had assumed her sister was firmly on Ethan's side. That doesn't make sense. It says she provided key evidence and testimony about the Singapore project and something called Red Diamond Investments. James looked at Isabel. "Did you know about any of this?" "Only what Jennifer Lane told me today," Isabel admitted. "I had no idea the fraud was so extensive, or that Michael Davis was involved." Her doorbell rang. Isabel went to the intercom, half expecting it to be more reporters who had somehow gotten past the doorman. "Mrs. Kensington, this is Agent Rodriguez with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I need to speak with you regarding Kensington Enterprises." Isabel exchanged a worried look with James before buzzing the agent up. Minutes later, a tall, serious-looking woman with short, dark hair and another agent, a younger man with glasses, were sitting in her living room. "Mrs. Kensington, I'm Agent Rodriguez and this is Agent Miller. We're investigating financial fraud at Kensington Enterprises, specifically related to a project known as Singapore." Isabel nodded. "I just learned about the Singapore fraud today from a former employee named Jennifer Lane. She provided me with evidence that I was planning to turn over to authorities." Agent Rodriguez looked surprised. "You had no prior knowledge of the Singapore project's irregularities?" "None," Isabel said firmly. "As CFO, I oversaw many aspects of the company's finances, but Ethan had designated Singapore as a special project under his direct control. The financial reports I saw showed normal expenditures consistent with an overseas expansion. I had no reason to suspect fraud." "That aligns with what your husband has told us," Agent Miller said, making notes. "He's been quite clear that you had no knowledge or involvement in the Singapore scheme." "Ethan said that?" Isabel couldn't hide her surprise. Agent Rodriguez nodded. "Mr. Kensington has been cooperating fully since his arrest 2 hours ago. He's provided detailed information about his arrangement with Michael Davis and the diversion of company funds." James Wilson leaned forward. "What exactly does this mean for Mrs. Kensington and for Kensington Enterprises?" "That's partly why we're here," Agent Rodriguez explained. "While Mrs. Kensington is not a target of our investigation at this time, the company itself is under scrutiny. We'll need full access to all financial records, emails, and other documents, and the board will need to be prepared for significant disruption as we proceed." Isabel felt her stomach sink. Even if she wasn't personally implicated, the scandal could destroy the company she and Ethan had built. "There's something else you should know," Agent Miller added. "Your sister is currently under protective custody. She provided key information that led to the arrests, and there's concern that Michael Davis's associates might try to silence her." "Is she in danger?" Despite everything, Isabel felt a surge of worry for Olivia. "We're taking precautions," Agent Rodriguez assured her, "but it would be best if her cooperation wasn't widely known yet." After the agents left with copies of Jennifer Lane's files, Isabel sat in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. The company she had fought so hard to save was now facing a potentially fatal scandal. Her husband was in custody, cooperating with authorities. And her sister, who had betrayed her twice, had possibly redeemed herself by going to the SEC. "What do I do now, James?" she asked quietly. James thought for a moment. "You get ahead of this. Call an emergency board meeting first thing tomorrow. Inform them of everything you've learned and announce full cooperation with the investigation. Then hold a press conference. Show that Kensington Enterprises under your leadership is committed to transparency and accountability." Will it be enough? Isabel wasn't sure anything could save the company now. "I don't know," James admitted, "but it's the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome." Isabel nodded slowly. "Set it up. Both meetings. I'll be ready." After James left, Isabel stood at her window looking out at the city lights. Just days ago, her biggest concern had been Ethan's affair with her sister. Now she was facing the possible collapse of everything she had worked for. But as she watched the lights of New York twinkling in the darkness, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had survived Ethan's betrayal. She would survive this too. Whatever happened, her phone rang again. Rebecca Williams. "Belle, my God, have you seen the news? It's everywhere. The stock is going to crash when the market opens tomorrow." "I know," Isabel said calmly. "But we're going to face this head on. Emergency board meeting at 7 a.m., press conference at 9. I need you there, Rebecca." "Of course I'll be there, but Isabel, you need to know. Some of the board members are already talking about resignation. They're worried about personal liability. Let them talk. By morning, we'll have a plan." After hanging up, Isabel made one more call, to Maria Garcia. "Maria, I need you to do something for me, something confidential." "Anything," Maria replied without hesitation. "I need to see Ethan." The Federal Detention Center was cold and sterile, nothing like the luxury Ethan was accustomed to. He sat at a metal table in an interview room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed designed to strip away every last vestige of dignity. He had spent hours talking to federal agents, telling them everything about Singapore, about Red Diamond, about his dealings with Michael Davis. It had been strangely liberating, finally letting go of all the secrets and lies. When the door opened, the last person he expected to see was Isabel. Yet there she was, as elegant as ever in a simple black pantsuit, her face a mask of composure. "You have 15 minutes, the guard told her before closing the door. For a long moment, they just looked at each other in silence. Ethan noticed that Isabel wasn't wearing her wedding ring. "Why did you ask to see me?" he finally asked. "I needed to know why," Isabel said simply. "Why Singapore? Why Michael Davis? Why Olivia? Just why Ethan?" Ethan looked down at his hands, the question he'd been dreading. "I wish I had a good answer for you. Something that would make any of it make sense." "Try," Isabel said, her voice hard. He sighed. "Singapore started small, just a way to create some financial cushion outside the company in case we ever hit hard times. But then it grew. The more I got away with, the more I thought I could take. And then Michael approached me with an offer I couldn't refuse, a partnership that would make us both rich, regardless of what happened to Kensington." "And Olivia?" Ethan winced at the pain in Isabel's voice. "That was, I don't know, a distraction, a thrill, something that was just mine, that wasn't part of our business partnership." He looked up at her. "It wasn't love, if that's what you're wondering. It was selfish and stupid, and I knew it would destroy you if you ever found out, but I did it. Anyway." Isabel studied his face as if looking for something she had missed before. "Did you ever love me, Ethan? Or was I just a convenient business partner?" "I did love you," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "In the beginning, before the money and the success changed me, before I started believing I deserved more, deserved everything, I loved you then. But not enough to be faithful. Not enough to be honest. No," he admitted. "Not enough for that." Isabel took a deep breath. "I'm going to try to save the company. The board is meeting tomorrow, and I'm holding a press conference after that. I won't lie for you, Ethan. I'll tell them I had no knowledge of the fraud, which is the truth. But I also won't go out of my way to vilify you. That would only hurt the company more. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that whatever happens to Kensington Enterprises now, it's not out of revenge. It's because I still believe in what we built, even if you betrayed it." Ethan nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I told the agents you had no knowledge of Singapore or Red Diamond. That was the truth. I know. They told me. Isabel stood up. I'm filing for divorce. Ethan, my lawyer will contact yours. I expected that, he said, feeling a strange sense of loss despite knowing it was inevitable. What about Olivia? Isabel's expression hardened. What about her? She went to the SEC. Did you know that? She's the reason they moved so quickly. Yes, I know. After stealing my phone and betraying me a second time. She was scared, Ethan said, not sure why he was defending Olivia. I threatened your mother, told her I'd hurt her if Olivia didn't help me. That's on me, not her. Isabel's composure cracked for the first time. You threatened my mother, my 65-year-old widowed mother. I was desperate, Ethan said, ashamed. When you took the company, I lost everything. I thought I could still win if I just had enough leverage. Isabel took a step back, as if physically distancing herself from his confession. I came here hoping to understand, but I think I understand too well now. You were willing to destroy anything, hurt anyone to get what you wanted. Yes, he admitted. That's who I became. Not who I was when you married me, but who I am now. At least you're finally being honest. Isabel moved toward the door. Goodbye, Ethan. Isabel, he called as she knocked for the guard. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for all of it. For hurting you, for betraying you, for becoming someone you could never respect. She turned to look at him one last time. I believe you're sorry, Ethan, but it doesn't change anything. As the door closed behind her, Ethan sat alone in the sterile room, confronting the reality of what his life had become. He had lost everything, his company, his freedom, his wife, and the worst part was knowing he had no one to blame but himself. The board meeting the next morning was tense. Isabel had barely slept, spending most of the night preparing her remarks and strategy. She wore a dark blue suit, a color of strength and stability, and made sure to look each board member in the eye as she explained what she knew about the Singapore fraud and Michael Davis's involvement. The company will survive this, she told them, her voice steady and confident, but only with complete transparency and full cooperation with authorities. I've instructed our legal team to provide everything the SEC and FBI have requested, and I'm personally reviewing all of our financials to identify any other areas of concern. What about the Palmer patents? Harold Chen asked. If Davis was targeting them, are they still secure? They are, Isabel confirmed. I've had our security team verify that no proprietary data was compromised. The patents remain our most valuable asset. And the stock price? David Reynolds asked. It's going to plummet when the market opens. Yes, it will, Isabel acknowledged. That's unavoidable. But if we handle this crisis correctly, it will recover. Over time, remember the core business is still sound. Our products, our people, our customers, none of that has changed. Some of us are concerned about personal liability, William Foster said bluntly. As board members, we approved budgets that included Singapore. Based on fraudulent information provided by Ethan, Isabel pointed out, James Wilson and our outside counsel believe the board is protected as long as you fully cooperate with the investigation. By the end of the meeting, Isabel had secured the board's commitment to stay united during the crisis. No one would resign immediately, though several made it clear they would be reconsidering their positions once the initial shock had passed. The press conference was harder. The room was packed with reporters, all shouting questions as Isabel approached the podium. Mrs. Kensington, did you know about your husband's fraud? Is it true that Michael Davis was trying to steal Kensington's technology? Will the company survive this scandal? Did your sister's affair with your husband lead to the discovery of the fraud? Isabel held up her hands for silence. I'll make a brief statement and then take questions. As many of you know, my husband, Ethan Kensington, was arrested yesterday in connection with allegations of financial fraud involving Kensington Enterprises. I want to state clearly that I had no knowledge of these activities, which were deliberately hidden from me and from the board of directors. She paused, making sure her next words were heard clearly. Kensington Enterprises is cooperating fully with authorities. We have provided all requested documentation and will continue to assist in the investigation in every way possible. Our company has always stood for innovation, integrity, and excellence, and those values will guide us through this difficult time. The questions that followed were brutal, often personal, sometimes accusatory. Isabel answered each one calmly, referring to legal counsel when appropriate, and never showing any sign of the turmoil she felt inside. When a reporter asked about Olivia, Isabel simply said, "My personal relationship with my sister is not relevant to this corporate matter. Next question." By the end of the press conference, Isabel was exhausted but satisfied. She had projected strength and transparency, exactly what the company needed right now. Maria met her as she left the podium. "You were amazing," she said, handing Isabel a bottle of water. "The board is impressed, and I've already had calls from 3 major investors saying they're standing by us." "That's good news," Isabel said, taking a grateful sip of water. "What about the stock?" Maria's expression grew more serious. "Down 30% at opening, but it's stabilized somewhat since your press conference." "That's better than I expected," Isabel admitted. "We need to—" She stopped as she noticed a familiar figure waiting by the elevator. Olivia. Her sister looked different somehow, less polished, more vulnerable, with none of her usual confidence. "What is she doing here?" Isabel asked, her voice cooling. "She insisted on seeing you," Maria explained. "Said it was important. Security checked her thoroughly. She's not carrying any recording devices or phones." Isabel hesitated, then nodded. "Give us a few minutes." As Maria stepped away, Isabel approached her sister, maintaining a safe distance. "What do you want, Olivia?" "To apologize," Olivia said simply, "and to explain, if you'll let me. I think you've explained enough with your actions. Please." "Well, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Against her better judgment, Isabel gestured toward a small conference room off the main hallway. Once they were inside with the door closed, she crossed her arms defensively. "Talk." Olivia took a deep breath. "First, I want you to know that going to the SEC was my decision, not because Ethan threatened Mom, though he did, but because it was the right thing to do. The only thing I could do to start making amends. After stealing my phone and betraying me a second time," Isabel pointed out coldly. "Yes," Olivia admitted, "I was terrified when Ethan threatened Mom. But once I saw what was on your phone, what Jennifer had given you, I knew I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't help him anymore, not when I saw the full extent of what he had done. So you decided to be the hero instead." Olivia shook her head. "Not a hero, just someone trying to fix a small part of the damage I've caused." She looked down at her hands. "The agents told me you didn't know about Singapore, that it was all Ethan." "Of course I didn't know," Isabel said sharply. "Do you think I would have been part of something like that?" "No," Olivia said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I realize now how completely he manipulated both of us. Me with flattery and attention, you with lies about the company." "That doesn't excuse what you did, Olivia. You knew he was my husband. You knew what it would do to me if I found out." "I know," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "There's no excuse. I was selfish and weak and stupid. I betrayed the one person who has always been there for me, who has always supported me even when I didn't deserve it." Isabel felt her anger warring with an unwelcome surge of empathy. This was her little sister, the girl she had protected and guided their whole lives. The person she had trusted most in the world next to Ethan, and both had betrayed her. "What do you want from me, Olivia? Forgiveness? Understanding? Because I don't have either of those things right now." "I don't expect forgiveness," Olivia said softly. "I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to hear from me directly that I'm sorry and that I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this right. I've given the SEC everything I know about Ethan and Michael Davis. I'm prepared to testify if it comes to that. At considerable risk to yourself," Isabel acknowledged reluctantly. "The agents mentioned you're under protective custody. It's not that bad. Just a safe house with a couple of federal agents for company." Olivia attempted a small smile. "Beats a motel in Queens." Despite everything, Isabel felt the corner of her mouth twitch. It was such an Olivia thing to say. Finding humor in even the darkest situations. "I'm leaving New York," Olivia continued, "after all this is over. The agents think I should start fresh somewhere else, with a new name if necessary. depending on how things go with Michael Davis and his associates. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can figure out who I want to be now. Isabel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The thought of Olivia disappearing from her life forever was strangely painful, despite everything that had happened. I've told Mom everything, Olivia added. She deserved to know the truth. She's heartbroken, of course, but she's strong like you. How did she take it? Better than I deserved. She said she still loves me, but that it will take time to trust me again. Olivia looked up at Isabel, her eyes filling with tears. She also said I should tell you something. What's that? That forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about not letting it control your future. Olivia wiped at her eyes. I'm not asking for your forgiveness today, Belle. I know it's too soon, maybe impossible, but I hope someday. Isabel felt her own eyes stinging. I don't know, Olivia. I honestly don't know if I can ever get past this. I understand, Olivia said, nodding. I should go, the agents are waiting. She stood up, hesitating by the door. Take care of yourself, Belle, and know that whatever happens with the company, you're going to be okay. You're the strongest person I've ever known. As Olivia turned to leave, Isabel found herself calling out, Livy. It was the childhood nickname she hadn't used in years. Olivia turned, surprised. Be safe, Isabel said simply. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face now. You too. After Olivia left, Isabel sat alone in the conference room for several minutes trying to compose herself. She wasn't ready to forgive her sister or Ethan. Perhaps she never would be. But for the first time since that night at the gala, she felt something besides anger and betrayal. Hope. Small and fragile, but definitely there. Her phone rang. Maria, wondering if everything was okay. Isabel took a deep breath and answered. I'm fine, she said, and was surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. Let's get back to work. We have a company to save. For the weeks that followed were among the most challenging of Isabel's life. The Singapore scandal dominated business news, and Kensington Enterprises' stock continued to suffer. Several major clients put their contracts on hold, waiting to see how the investigation would play out. Ethan and Michael Davis both pled guilty to multiple charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. In exchange for his cooperation, Ethan received a reduced sentence of 5 years. Michael Davis, who had been less cooperative and more deeply involved, received 12. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly, with Ethan offering no contest to any of Isabel's terms. He signed over his remaining shares in the company and made no claim on their joint assets. His attorneys explained that he wanted to make the process as painless as possible for her. Jennifer Lane was rehired at Kensington Enterprises, this time as head of a new compliance department, specifically tasked with ensuring financial transparency and ethical practices throughout the company. Olivia testified at both Ethan's and Michael's sentencing hearings, then disappeared from public view. The only contact Isabel had with her was a brief email with a new phone number and the words, "If you ever want to talk." 6 months after the scandal broke, Kensington Enterprises was still standing. The stock had recovered about half of its losses, and most clients had returned, reassured by the company's new commitment to transparency and the absence of any evidence that the fraud extended beyond Singapore. Isabel sat in her office, still Ethan's old office, though she had redecorated it completely, reviewing the quarterly financials with Maria. "We're going to make it," Maria said, a note of surprise in her voice. "A year ago, I wouldn't have thought it possible, but these numbers don't lie. We're going to survive this." "Not just survive," Isabel corrected her. "Thrive. The Palmer patents are finally ready for market, and the new AI division is already attracting attention. We're going to come back stronger than before." Maria smiled. "All because of you, Isabel. No one else could have led the company through this crisis." "Not just me," Isabel said, thinking of the board members who had stood by her, the employees who had worked tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation, and even Jennifer Lane, whose courage had helped expose the truth. It took all of us. After Maria left, Isabel walked to the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed her most public humiliation and her most hard-won triumph. She had lost her husband and her sister, but she had saved the company they had built. And in the process, she had found a strength in herself she hadn't known existed. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was Rebecca, reminding her about dinner that night. Isabel smiled as she replied. Her circle of friends had grown smaller but more loyal in the wake of the scandal. The people who remained in her life now were the ones who truly mattered. As she gathered her things to leave for the day, Isabel noticed an envelope on her desk that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a small article, from a local paper in Montana, announcing the opening of a new art therapy center for children. The center's director was listed as Olivia Grant. There was no note, but Isabel knew who had sent it. She slipped the clipping back into the envelope and placed it in her desk drawer. She wasn't ready to reach out to Olivia yet, but knowing her sister was building a new life, trying to do something good, brought an unexpected sense of peace. Outside, the city was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Isabel took a deep breath of the spring air as she walked to her car. She had survived the betrayal heard around the world. She had lost, grieved, fought, and ultimately prevailed. And whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and dignity that had carried her through the storm. 1 year later, the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, New York, was a far cry from the luxurious penthouse Ethan Kensington had once called home. The minimum security prison housed many white-collar criminals, men who, like Ethan, had fallen from positions of wealth and power. Ethan sat in the visitors' area, nervously straightening his prison-issued khakis. He hadn't had a visitor in months, not since his attorney had come to finalize the last details of his divorce from Isabel. The message that someone was here to see him had been unexpected. When the door opened and he saw who it was, he couldn't hide his surprise. "Mother Grant," he said, rising to his feet. Isabel and Olivia's mother, Eleanor Grant, stood before him, elegant even at 66, her silver hair styled perfectly, her posture straight and dignified. She had never particularly liked Ethan, even before the scandal, finding him too ambitious, too focused on appearances. "Ethan," she said coolly, taking the seat across from him, "you look, well, considering." He sat back down, unsure what to say. "This is unexpected." "Yes, I imagine it is." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "I debated whether to come at all, but there are things that need to be said, and I prefer to say them face to face. Is this about Isabel or Olivia?" A thought occurred to him. "Has something happened to them?" "They're both fine," Eleanor assured him. "Better than fine, actually. Isabel has done remarkable things with the company. And Olivia," she paused, "Olivia is finding her way, slowly but surely." "I'm glad," Ethan said, and meant it. "Why are you here then?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "To tell you that I know what you did, Ethan. Not just the affair with Olivia or the financial fraud. I know you threatened me as a way to control my daughter." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I did," he admitted. "It was inexcusable." "Yes, it was." Eleanor's voice was steady, controlled. "You manipulated and used both my daughters. You threatened an old woman to get what you wanted. You betrayed not just your wife's trust, but the trust of everyone who believed in you." "I know," Ethan said quietly, "and I'm paying for it every day I'm in here." "Are you?" Eleanor asked. "Are you really understanding the damage you've done? Because that's why I came, Ethan. Not to berate you, but to make sure you truly comprehend the consequences of your actions." She reached into her purse and took out several photographs, placing them on the table between them. "This is Isabel, at the company's relaunch event 6 months ago. She's smiling, but if you look closely, you can see how much weight she's lost, how tired she is behind that smile." She laid down another photo. "This is Olivia, at her new place in Montana. She's using a different name now, did you know that? She can't even be herself anymore, because of her association with you and Michael Davis." Ethan looked at the photos, feeling a wave of shame wash over him. In both images, the sisters looked different from how he remembered them. Thinner, more serious, with a guardedness that hadn't been there before. I didn't come to make you feel guilty, though that would be justified, Eleanor continued. I came because I want to know if you understand what you destroyed, and if you have any intention of becoming a better man during your time here. The question caught Ethan off guard. No one had asked him about his future, about who he wanted to be when he got out. Most people assumed he would just go back to his old ways, finding new people to manipulate, new schemes to run. I think about it every day, he said slowly. About who I was, who I became, and who I want to be when I leave this place. The man who did those things, who hurt Isabel, who used Olivia, who threatened you. I don't want to be him anymore. Eleanor studied his face, looking for signs of deception. And who do you want to be instead? Someone better, Ethan said simply. Someone who takes responsibility for his actions, someone who tries to make amends, even knowing that some things can't be fixed. Pretty words, Eleanor commented. But words are easy, Ethan. It's actions that matter. I know, he acknowledged, and I have nothing but time to think about how my actions can match my words when I get out. Eleanor gathered up the photographs and put them back in her purse. Isabel doesn't know I'm here, she said. Neither does Olivia. This was my decision to see for myself what kind of man you've become. And what have you decided? Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor stood up, smoothing her skirt. I'm reserving judgment, but I will say this. You seem less arrogant, less certain of your own superiority. That's a start. As she turned to leave, Ethan called after her. Eleanor? She paused, looking back at him. Thank you for coming. And please tell them I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but it's true. Eleanor nodded once. I'll tell them. Whether they want to hear it is another matter. After she left, Ethan sat alone, thinking about their conversation. Eleanor was right. Words were easy, but the remorse he felt was real, as was his desire to become a better person. The question was, would he have the courage to live up to that desire when he was finally free again? Suestam Isabel stood at the podium in Kensington Tower's main conference room, addressing the assembled employees and press. The company's second quarter results had just been released, showing a significant profit for the first time since the scandal. Today marks an important milestone in Kensington Enterprises' recovery, she told the crowd, her voice confident. Through your hard work and dedication, we have not just survived a crisis that would have destroyed many companies, but we have emerged stronger, more transparent, and more committed to ethical business practices than ever before. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Isabel had earned the respect and loyalty of her employees through her tireless efforts to save the company. She had been honest about the challenges they faced, shared the sacrifices needed, and led by example every step of the way. After the announcement, she met with her executive team in her office to discuss their next steps. The Palmer patents are exceeding all expectations, Jennifer Lane reported. Now serving as Chief Innovation Officer, Jennifer had proven to be one of Isabel's most valuable allies in rebuilding the company. The licensing agreements alone will bring in over $50 million this year, and our new AI division is attracting top talent, added Dr. Simon Chen, who had been hired to lead their artificial intelligence research. The scandal actually worked in our favor there. Engineers who wouldn't have considered us before are excited about being part of the company's reinvention. Isabel listened, making notes and asking questions. The team had grown close over the past year, forged by the crisis they had weathered together. What about the Davis Technologies situation? She asked Maria, who had been promoted to COO. Their stock is still struggling, Maria reported. Without Michael Davis and without the stolen research they were counting on, they've lost their competitive edge. There are rumors they might be broken up and sold off in pieces. Isabel nodded, feeling no satisfaction at the news. The rivalry with Davis Technologies seemed petty and unimportant now. She was focused on building something positive, not celebrating someone else's downfall. After the meeting, Rebecca Williams lingered behind. She and Isabel had become closer than ever during the crisis, with Rebecca standing firmly by her side when other friends had disappeared. Dinner tonight? Rebecca suggested. We should celebrate the quarterly results. I'd love to, Isabel agreed. But can we make it early? I have a video call at 9. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Another call with Dr. Anderson about the Children's Hospital project. Isabel felt herself blushing slightly. Yes, actually. The plans for the new pediatric wing are almost finalized. And the fact that Dr. Anderson happens to be brilliant, dedicated, and quite handsome has nothing to do with scheduling these calls during your personal time, Rebecca teased. He's in Seattle. The time difference makes evening calls necessary, Isabel pointed out, ignoring the comment about Dr. David Anderson's appearance. Rebecca said skeptically. And the flowers he sent after the last board presentation were purely professional, I suppose. They were a thank you for the company's donation to the hospital, Isabel insisted, but she couldn't help smiling. Truth was, her virtual meetings with Dr. Anderson had become something she looked forward to, and not just because of the Children's Hospital project. David was different from anyone she had met before, thoughtful, compassionate, and completely unimpressed by her wealth or position. As the head of pediatric surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital, he cared about saving lives, not social status or corporate power plays. They had met 6 months ago when Isabel had decided to redirect some of the company's charitable giving toward pediatric medical research. What had started as formal discussions about funding had gradually evolved into something more personal, though neither had acknowledged it openly yet. Just be careful, Rebecca advised, her tone becoming more serious. It's only been a year since everything happened with Ethan. It's okay to take things slow. We're just colleagues, Isabel maintained, though she knew there was potential for more. But I appreciate your concern. After Rebecca left, Isabel turned to the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed both her humiliation and her triumph. The past year had been about survival, professional and personal. She had focused all her energy on saving the company, on proving to the world and to herself that she was more than just Ethan Kensington's betrayed wife. Now, with the company stable and growing again, perhaps it was time to think about her own happiness. The divorce was final, Ethan was serving his sentence, and she was finally starting to feel like herself again, stronger, wiser, and ready to trust her own judgment once more. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Call me when you have a moment. Nothing urgent, just want to chat. Isabel smiled. Her relationship with Eleanor had deepened in the wake of the scandal. Her mother had been a source of strength and wisdom, offering support without judgment. Tonight, after her call with David, she would give her mother a call and catch up on the latest news from Connecticut. For now, though, she had a company to run and a future to build. One day, one decision, one success at a time. Such Art Therapy Center in Bozeman, Montana, was housed in a converted Victorian home, painted a cheerful yellow with blue trim. Children's artwork decorated the windows, and a sign out front read, New Horizons, Art Healing Hearts. Inside, Olivia Grant, now known professionally as Liv Graham, was helping a group of children with their painting projects. At 36, she looked different from the glamorous model she had once been. Her hair was shorter, her clothes simple and practical, and she wore little makeup. But the biggest change was in her eyes, clearer now, more focused, with a sense of purpose. That had been missing before. That's beautiful, Cody, she told a small boy who was painting what appeared to be a blue dog with 6 legs. I love how you use different shades of blue, the boy beamed up at her. It's my dog from heaven. He died, but now he has extra legs so he can run faster. Olivia knelt beside him. That's a wonderful way to remember him. Do you want to tell me more about your dog? As Cody chattered about his beloved pet, Olivia listened attentively. This was what she did now, created a safe space for children to express their feelings through art, whether they were dealing with illness, loss, trauma, or family problems. When she had first arrived in Montana a year ago, hiding from Michael Davis's associates and her own notoriety, she had felt lost and alone. The art therapy training had been a way to occupy her mind, to feel useful. She had never expected it to become her calling. After the children left for the day, Olivia stayed to clean up the studio. Her assistant, a college student named Maya, helped stack the small chairs and wash the paintbrushes. Great session today, Maya commented. Cody really opened up. Olivia nodded. He's making progress. His mum says he's having fewer nightmares about the accident. You're really good with them, you know, Maya said. The kids all adore you. They make it easy, Olivia replied with a smile. They're so resilient, so honest about their feelings. I learn more from them than they do from me. After Maya left, Olivia went upstairs to her small apartment above the center. It was nothing like the luxury she had once been accustomed to, but it was comfortable and welcoming, filled with books, plants, and her own artwork. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. Montana was about as far from her old life in New York as she could get, both geographically and in every other way. Here no one knew her as Olivia Grant, the model who had an affair with her sister's husband. She was just Liv, the art therapist who worked with kids. Her phone rang, her mother's daily call. Despite the distance and the time difference, Eleanor, Grant made a point of checking in with her younger daughter every day. Hi, Mum, Olivia answered warmly. Hello, darling. How was your day? Good. Busy. We had the group session with the trauma patients this morning. That's the one with the little boy who lost his parents in the car accident? Cody, yes. He's doing better, starting to talk about his feelings more, which is progress. They chatted for a while about the children, the center, and the small details of daily life. Then Eleanor said, I have some news. Something in her mother's tone made Olivia sit up straighter. What is it? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Eleanor assured her. But I did something today that you should know about. I visited Ethan in prison. Olivia nearly dropped her tea. You what? Why would you do that? I needed to see him for myself, to understand if he regrets what he did, what he became. And? Olivia couldn't help asking. Does he? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I believe he does, yes. He seems changed, humbled. Whether that will last once he's released is another question. Olivia felt a confusing mix of emotions at the mention of Ethan. Their affair seemed like something from another lifetime now, a mistake made by a person she barely recognized as herself. Does Isabel know you went? Not yet, Eleanor admitted. I'll tell her when the time is right, but I thought you should know since he asked about you. What did he say? Olivia couldn't stop herself from asking. He said he was sorry. For everything. He asked me to tell both you and Isabel that. Olivia was silent, processing this. Ethan's apology meant little compared to the damage he had caused, but it was unexpected nonetheless. Have you spoken to Belle lately? She asked, changing the subject slightly. She still used her sister's nickname in conversation with their mother, though she no longer felt she had the right to use it directly with Isabel. We had dinner last week, Eleanor said. She's doing well. The company is thriving, and she mentioned a doctor she's been talking to about a new charity project. There was something in her voice when she mentioned him. That's good, Olivia said sincerely. She deserves happiness. The unspoken question hung between them. Would Isabel ever be able to forgive Olivia? In the year since the scandal, they had communicated only sporadically, mainly through their mother. Olivia had sent a few emails, and Isabel had responded, politely but briefly. The deep bond they had once shared seemed irreparably broken. She asked about you, Eleanor offered. Wanted to know how the center was doing. Olivia felt a spark of hope at that. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're doing meaningful work, helping children heal through art. That you're building a new life for yourself. After saying goodbye to her mother, Olivia sat with her cooling tea, thinking about Isabel. She missed her sister terribly. The person who had always believed in her, supported her, loved her unconditionally, until she had destroyed that love with her selfishness and weakness. Making amends to Isabel had become one of the driving forces in Olivia's new life, not with the expectation of forgiveness, but because it was the right thing to do. Each child she helped, each day she lived with integrity and purpose, was a small step toward becoming someone worthy of her sister's respect again, even if not her trust. On impulse, Olivia went to her desk and took out a note card. She wrote simply, Belle, the center is helping so many children now. I think of you every day and hope you are finding happiness. Livy. She addressed the envelope to Isabel at Kensington Tower, added a photo of the children's latest art project, and sealed it. Tomorrow she would mail it, another small bridge, extended across the chasm between them. Whether Isabel would ever choose to cross that bridge was beyond her control. All Olivia could do was continue to build her new life with honesty and purpose, and hope that someday, somehow, her sister might find it in her heart to give her another chance. Isabel's video call with Dr. David Anderson was supposed to be about the funding for the new pediatric wing, but somehow they had ended up discussing their favorite books, their childhood memories, and now their thoughts on the best pizza toppings. Pineapple on pizza is an abomination, David insisted, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. 48, he had the relaxed confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, with smile lines around his eyes and silver threading through his dark hair. That's just close-minded thinking, Isabel teased back. Have you ever actually tried it? I have under protest, and it confirmed my position. Some things just don't belong together, Isabel laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Talking with David was easy, natural. There was none of the power dynamics that had characterized her relationship with Ethan, no hidden agendas or unspoken expectations. We've completely gotten off track, she said, attempting to steer the conversation back to business. The funding proposal for the pediatric wing. Right, of course, David said, suddenly professional again. The board was very impressed with your company's commitment. The naming opportunity for the research center is yours if you want it. I've been thinking about that, Isabel said. I'd prefer if it wasn't the Kensington Research Center. Too many associations. What about naming it after Jennifer Lane instead? She's the one who exposed the fraud at my company and helped save it. Plus, she lost her younger sister to childhood cancer. It would mean a lot to her. David's expression softened. The Lane Research Center. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'll propose it to the board. There was a pause, and then David said, Isabel, I've been meaning to ask. I'll be in New York next month for a medical conference. Would you be interested in having dinner? In person, I mean. Not a video call. Isabel felt a flutter of nervousness. This would be crossing a line from professional collaboration to something more personal. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Very much. Great, David said, looking genuinely pleased. I'll email you the details once my schedule is finalized. After they ended the call, Isabel sat at her desk, smiling to herself. It was just dinner, she reminded herself. Not a commitment, not a relationship, just two people who enjoyed talking to each other, meeting in person for the first time. But still it felt significant, her first step toward opening herself up to the possibility of trusting someone again. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her mother. Hi, Mom, she answered. I was just about to call you. Perfect timing then, Eleanor said. How are you, darling? Rebecca mentioned the quarterly results were excellent. They were. The company is finally back on solid ground. Isabel hesitated, then added, and I just finished a call with Dr. Anderson about the Children's Hospital project. He's coming to New York next month and we're having dinner. Is this a date? Eleanor asked directly. Isabel laughed. Maybe. I'm not sure. It feels like it might be. Good for you, Eleanor said warmly. It's time you thought about your own happiness again. There was a pause, and Isabel sensed her mother had something more to say. What is it, Mom? You have that tone. What tone? The one you use when you have something to tell me but aren't sure how I'll react. Eleanor sighed. You always could read me too well. Yes, there is something. I went to see Ethan today. Isabel felt her body tense. Why would you do that? I needed to see him for myself, to understand if there was any genuine remorse there, or if he was just sorry he got caught. And, Isabel couldn't help asking, what's your verdict? He seems changed, Eleanor said carefully. Humbled. Whether it's permanent or just a product of his circumstances remains to be seen. Isabel was silent, absorbing this. She had worked hard to put Ethan out of her mind, to focus on rebuilding her life without constantly thinking about his betrayal. He asked about you, Eleanor continued, and about Olivia. He wanted me to tell you both that he's sorry. A bit. Late for that, Isabel said, more sharply than she intended. Yes, it is, Eleanor agreed, but I thought you should know nonetheless. They talked for a while longer, moving on to safer topics. Eleanor's garden, an upcoming charity event, a book they had both recently read. But Isabel's mind kept returning to the news about Ethan. She didn't want to care about his remorse or lack thereof. She had moved on, was building a new life without him. And yet, hearing that he was sorry stirred up emotions she thought she had put to rest. How is Olivia? She found herself asking, another topic she usually avoided. She's doing well, Eleanor said, a note of relief in her voice that Isabel had asked. The art therapy center is thriving. She's really found her calling, helping those children. That's good, Isabel said, and meant it. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to wish unhappiness on her sister. After saying goodbye to her mother, Isabel went to the living room window, looking out at the city lights. Her life had taken such an unexpected turn. A year ago, she had been Ethan Kensington's wife, CFO of their company, with a clear plan for her future. Now she was divorced, CEO of a company she had saved from ruin, and cautiously considering a dinner that might be a date with a pediatric surgeon from Seattle. And somewhere in Montana, her sister was building a new life too, helping children heal through art. It wasn't the life she had planned, but standing there in her apartment, Isabel realized it might turn out to be a better one, more authentic, more meaningful, more true to who she really was. Her doorman called up to let her know she had mail. Minutes later, Isabel sat at her kitchen table, looking at a simple note card with a photo of children's artwork. The message was brief, just a few lines in Olivia's handwriting. Belle, the center is helping so many children now. I think of you every day and hope you are finding happiness. Livy. Isabel ran her fingers over the words, feeling the indentations. In the paper where Olivia had pressed down with the pen, her sister was reaching out again, as she had been doing periodically over the past year. Small gestures, no pressure, just keeping the connection alive. For the first time, Isabel felt something shift inside her. The anger and hurt were still there, but they had lost some of their sharpness. In their place was a tentative curiosity about who Olivia was becoming in her new life, what she was learning, how she was changing. Isabel reached for her phone, then hesitated. She wasn't ready for a call, not yet. But perhaps, she typed out a text message. The artwork is beautiful. I'm glad the center is doing well. Take care, Belle. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a small opening in the wall between them. As she pressed send, Isabel felt a sense of lightness, as if she had put down a burden she had been carrying for too long. The betrayal would always be part of her story, but it didn't have to define her future. That was hers to write one day at a time. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small moments of healing taking place within its millions of homes. But in Isabel's apartment, something important had happened, a first step toward whatever came next. Are you sure about this? Maria asked, watching Isabel pack the last of her personal items from her office at Kensington Tower. Isabel looked around the space that had been hers for the past 3 years, first as she fought to save the company, then as she led it to new heights of success. The view of Manhattan was as impressive as ever, but she felt ready to leave it behind. I'm sure, she said, closing the box. It's time for something new. The past 2 years had been remarkable ones for Kensington Enterprises. Under Isabel's leadership, the company had not only recovered from the Singapore scandal, but had flourished, expanding into new markets and establishing itself as a leader in ethical business practices. The stock price was at an all-time high, and the board had recently voted unanimous approval for Isabel's succession plan. Rebecca will make an excellent CEO, Isabel continued, referring to Rebecca Williams, who had been her closest ally throughout the crisis and recovery. And you'll be right beside her as COO. The company couldn't be in better hands. But Seattle, Maria pressed. That's so far from New York, from everything you've built here. Isabel smiled. That's part of the appeal, a fresh start, a new challenge. She didn't mention the other reason for her move. Dr. David Anderson, who who had gone from being a business contact to a dinner date to, over the past 2 years, the most important person in her life. Their long-distance relationship had flourished. Despite the challenges, David flew to New York when he could, Isabel to Seattle when her schedule allowed. They had spent holidays together, met each other's friends, and gradually built a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. 3 months ago, during a quiet weekend at his cabin on Lake Washington, David had proposed. Isabel had said yes, without hesitation. Now she was preparing to leave New York to join him in Seattle, where she would be heading the newly established Kensington Foundation, focused on pediatric medical research and healthcare accessibility. The charity gala tomorrow night is going to be quite emotional, Maria said, changing the subject. Everyone who's anyone in New York will be there to say goodbye. I hope it raises a lot of money for the foundation, Isabel replied. That's what really matters. After Maria left, Isabel took one last look around her office. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that night at the Plaza Hotel when she had caught Ethan with Olivia. The pain of that betrayal had faded over time, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the strength she had discovered in herself as a result. Her phone buzzed with a text. It was David. Just landed, can't wait to see you, love you. Isabel smiled as she replied, can't wait to see you too. Finishing up at the office, love you more. Their relationship was so different from what she had had with Ethan. Where Ethan had been charming but ultimately selfish, David was genuine and giving. Where her marriage had been as much a business partnership as a romantic relationship, what she had with David was built on deeper emotional connection. She was about to leave when her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Kensington, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Who is it? Isabel asked, though something in her assistant's hesitant tone gave her a sense of who it might be. Olivia Grant, your sister. Isabel froze. She and Olivia had been in sporadic contact over the past 2 years, mostly through texts and occasional email. Their communications had gradually become more frequent and less formal, but they hadn't seen each other face to face since before Olivia had left for Montana. Send her in, Isabel said after a moment's hesitation. Olivia entered the office, tentatively, looking both familiar and strange to Isabel. Her hair was still short, but now there were strands of premature gray mixed with the blonde. She was dressed simply in jeans and a blue sweater, with minimal makeup, a far cry from the glamorous woman she had once been. Belle, she said softly, I'm sorry to show up like this, without warning. I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to come, if I called first. Isabel stood behind her desk, maintaining the physical barrier between them. What are you doing in New York? Mom said you were still in Montana. I am. Normally. But I heard about the gala tomorrow night. Your farewell to New York, I wanted to be there. Olivia looked down at her hands. I understand if you don't want me to come. I just thought, after all this time. Isabel studied her sister's face, looking for signs of the old Olivia, the self-centered, impulsive woman who had betrayed her so deeply. But all she saw was someone older, humbler, with a quiet dignity that hadn't been there before. Why now? Isabel asked. It's been 3 years. Because you're leaving New York, starting a new life, Olivia said. And because I've been working on myself, trying to become someone better, someone worthy of being your sister again. She paused. I don't expect forgiveness, Belle. I just want a chance to be in the same room with you, to see you happy in your new life, even if from a distance. Isabel felt the last of her resistance crumbling. The anger that had sustained her through the worst days after the scandal had long since faded, replaced by a complicated mix of emotions that included, to her surprise, a persistent affection for the sister who had been her closest confidant for most of her life. The gala is black tie, she said finally. Do you have something to wear? Olivia looked up, hope dawning in her eyes. I'm sure I can find something. Does that mean... It means you can come, Isabel said, not quite ready to offer more. I'll have my assistant add your name to the guest list. Thank you, Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. There was an awkward pause, neither sister sure what to say next. Finally, Olivia asked, "Is it true you're getting married again? Mom mentioned you were seeing someone serious." Isabel nodded, a smile coming naturally at the thought of David. "His name is David Anderson. He's a pediatric surgeon in Seattle. The wedding is in the spring, a small ceremony at his cabin on the lake." "He sounds wonderful," Olivia said sincerely. "I'm happy for you, Belle. You deserve someone who treasures you." The genuine warmth in Olivia's voice touched something in Isabel. On impulse, she moved from behind the desk and took a step toward her sister. "What about you? Mom says the art therapy center is doing well, but she never mentions if there's anyone special in your life." Olivia shook her head. "No, not right. Now I've been focused on the center, on the children, on figuring out who I am now, who I want to be." She hesitated. "I've been seeing a therapist too, working through why I did what I did, why I was so willing to betray the person who always supported me." "And?" Isabel couldn't help asking. "What have you learned?" "That I was desperately insecure, always comparing myself to you and feeling inadequate. That I wanted to prove I could take something that was yours, as if that would somehow make me as valuable, as worthy." Olivia's voice was steady, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It wasn't about Ethan, not really. It was about my own brokenness, but that's not an excuse. Nothing could excuse what I did to you." Isabel felt her own eyes filling with tears. The raw honesty in Olivia's words spoke of real change, of hard-won self-awareness. "I've thought a lot about forgiveness over the past 3 years," Isabel said slowly. "At first, I couldn't imagine ever forgiving either of you. The betrayal was too deep, too personal." "I understand," Olivia said softly. "But time changes things," Isabel continued. "And I realized that holding on to that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you or Ethan. That forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but it does mean letting go of the power that anger had over me." She took another step closer, to her sister. "I've forgiven Ethan in the sense that I don't wish him ill. I hope he uses his time in prison to become a better person, but we'll never have a relationship again. There's too much damage there." "And me?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabel met her sister's gaze directly. "You're different. You're my sister. We shared a lifetime before that night at the plaza, and you've spent the past 3 years trying to make amends, not just to me, but by helping others, by becoming someone better." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'd like to try," Isabel said simply. "Not to go back to how things were, that's impossible, but to find a new way forward, as the people we are now." The tears Olivia had been holding back finally spilled over. "Oh, Belle, I've missed you so much. Every day I've thought about you, wondered if you were okay, if you were happy." "I am happy," Isabel assured her. "It took time, but I found my way there." Tentatively, as if afraid of being rejected, Olivia opened her arms. Isabel hesitated only a moment before stepping into her sister's embrace. It felt both strange and familiar, this connection that had once been so natural between them. When they pulled apart, both wiping away tears, Isabel said, "I'm having dinner tonight with David and Mom. She just flew in for the gala. Would you like to join us?" "Are you sure?" Olivia asked, surprised. "What will David think?" "David knows everything," Isabel said, "and he's the most forgiving person I've ever met. He'll be fine. Mom will be thrilled. She's been hoping for this for a long time." As they left the office together, Isabel felt a sense of completion, as if a chapter that had been left unfinished was finally nearing its conclusion. The betrayal would always be part of their story, but it no longer had to be the defining chapter. The ballroom of the Four Seasons was transformed for Isabel's farewell gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegantly dressed crowd, while displays around the room highlighted the work of the Kensington Foundation and its partnership with Seattle Children's Hospital. Isabel stood near the entrance with David greeting guests as they arrived. At 50, David Anderson was a striking figure in his tuxedo, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, his blue eyes warm as he shook hands and charmed New York's elite with his unpretentious manner. "You look beautiful," he whispered to Isabel, during a brief lull in arrivals. She wore a deep, emerald gown that complemented her eyes, her dark hair swept up in an elegant style. "So do you," she replied with a smile. "Though I'm not sure beautiful is the right word for a distinguished surgeon." "Handsome, then," he conceded with a laugh. "Are you nervous about your speech?" "A little," Isabel admitted. "It feels like the end of an era." "And the beginning of a new one," he reminded her, squeezing her hand. More guests arrived. Board members, executives, investors, and friends who had stood by Isabel through the scandal and recovery. Rebecca Williams was there with her husband, looking confident and ready to take over as CEO. Maria Garcia came with her new fiancé, a professor she had met at a company event. Eleanor Grant arrived, elegant in silver-grey silk, with Olivia beside her. The family dinner the night before had been emotional but healing, with David's calm presence helping to ease any awkwardness. Now, seeing her mother and sister together, both beaming with pride and happiness for her, Isabel felt a surge of gratitude for the family bonds that had bent but not broken under the strain of betrayal. As Isabel circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she was stopped by an elderly gentleman she didn't recognize. "Ms. Kensington," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "Forgive the intrusion. I'm Harold Nichols, Michael Davis's former attorney." Isabel tensed slightly. Michael Davis was not a name she expected to hear tonight. "Mr. Nichols, how can I help you?" "I have something for you," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "From Mr. Davis. He asked me to deliver it personally when the time was right. With his passing last month, I believe that time has come." Isabel took the envelope reluctantly. "I wasn't aware Michael Davis had died." "Pancreatic cancer," Nichols explained. "Very quick, very private. He didn't want it in the news." After the lawyer moved on, Isabel stood holding the envelope, unsure whether to open it. David approached, concern in his eyes. "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," she said, showing him the envelope. "It's from Michael Davis. Apparently he died last month." David raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to open it?" "I don't know if I want to hear anything he has to say, even from beyond the grave." "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together," David assured her. Isabel nodded and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. "Ms. Kensington, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Terminal illness. Has a way of clarifying one's thinking, of stripping away pretense and ambition to reveal what truly matters. I owe you an apology that I did not have the courage to deliver in person. My actions, my partnership with your husband, caused you and your company tremendous harm. It was business, I told myself at the time. Nothing personal. But of course it was deeply personal to you. What you may not know is that I have watched with admiration as you rebuilt what we tried to destroy. You turned potential ruin into triumph through sheer force of will and character. You proved to be a far better business leader than either Ethan or myself. As a small gesture of atonement, I have established a trust fund of $50 million to support the Kensington Foundation's work in pediatric medical research. My attorney has the details. The money comes with no strings, no publicity requirements, and no expectation of forgiveness. I wish you continued success and happiness in your new life in Seattle. Sincerely, Michael Davis." Isabel read the letter twice, then handed it to David. $50 million, she said in disbelief, "for the foundation." "Are you going to accept it?" David asked after reading the letter. Isabel considered the question. The money would fund dozens of research projects, potentially saving or improving thousands of children's lives. But it came from a man who had conspired to destroy her company, who had been complicit in Ethan's betrayal. Yes, she decided finally. Not for him, not for his redemption or legacy, but for the children. Who will benefit? That's what matters now. David squeezed her hand in silent support. Across the room, Isabel caught Olivia's eye and gestured for her to join them. As her sister approached, Isabel felt a sudden clarity about the path that had led her here, the betrayal that had broken her world, but ultimately freed her to build a better one. "What's going on?" Olivia asked, looking concerned. "You seem shocked." Isabel handed her the letter. "Life is full of surprises," she said. "Some terrible, some wonderful, and some just unexpected. As Olivia read, her eyes widening, Isabel looked around the ballroom at the people who had become her extended family, colleagues who had stood by her, friends who had supported her, and now, tentatively, the sister she had thought lost to her forever. Later that evening, Isabel stood at the podium addressing the gathered crowd. Her speech thanked those who had helped save Kensington Enterprises, announced Rebecca Williams as the new CEO, and outlined the mission of the Kensington Foundation. She didn't mention Michael Davis's donation. That would come later once the legal details were settled. As she concluded her remarks, she found herself going off script. 3 years ago, my life changed irrevocably on a single night, she said, her voice steady and clear. What seemed like an ending of my marriage of trust, perhaps even of the company we had built, turned out to be a beginning of discovery, of strength I didn't know I possessed, and of new possibilities I couldn't have imagined. Her eyes found David in the crowd, then moved to Olivia and Eleanor standing together. I've learned that while betrayal can break your heart, it doesn't have to break your spirit. That forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened, but about freeing yourself from its power over you. And that sometimes the most painful endings can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. The applause that followed was thunderous. As Isabel made her way back through the crowd, accepting hugs and congratulations, she felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that had once defined her had become just one chapter in a much longer, richer story. Later, as she and David danced beneath the chandeliers, he pulled her close and whispered, "Proud of you." "For what?" she asked, smiling up at him. "For everything. For rebuilding the company. For finding the strength to forgive. For being willing to start over in Seattle with me." "Best decision I ever made," she assured him. "Though I'm not starting over, not really. I'm bringing everything I've learned with me." Across the room, she saw Olivia watching them, a gentle smile on her face. The road to reconciliation with her sister would be long and sometimes difficult, but they had taken the first steps. That was enough for now. As the orchestra began a new song, Isabel closed her eyes and let herself be held by the man she loved, surrounded by people who cared for her, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, she was ready for it. The betrayal heard around the world had tried to define her, but in the end it was her response to that betrayal, her courage, her resilience, her capacity for both justice and mercy, that had truly shaped who she had become. Ethan. Kensington waited in the release processing area of the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, wearing the civilian clothes that had been delivered for him: simple jeans, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket. After 3 years in prison, even these basic clothes felt strange, too loose and too colorful compared to the prison uniform he had grown accustomed to. "All set, Kensington," the processing officer said, handing him a small bag containing his personal effects, a wallet with no cash or cards, a watch that had stopped working, the wedding ring he had removed the day of his divorce. "Thank you," Ethan said, the politeness now ingrained after years of navigating prison life, where courtesy could mean the difference between conflict and peace. Outside, the late March sunshine was bright, almost painful to his eyes after so long in fluorescent lighting. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, bag in hand, wondering what came next. His lawyer had arranged for a halfway house in Brooklyn, a place where he could begin rebuilding some semblance of a life while he served the remaining 2 years of his sentence on probation. A car horn honked, and Ethan turned to see a silver sedan pulling up. The driver's window rolled down to reveal a face he hadn't expected. James Wilson, Isabel's lawyer. "Need a ride, Ethan?" James called. Ethan approached cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "Isabel asked me to meet you," James explained. "She thought you might need help with the transition. Get in." Bewildered, Ethan slid into the passenger seat. As James pulled away from the prison, Ethan tried to make sense of this unexpected development. "Why would Isabel send you? Last I heard, she was engaged and moving to Seattle." "She is," James confirmed, "getting married next month, but she wanted to make sure you had support for your release. She set up a trust fund to help you get back on your feet, enough for an apartment, basic expenses, and some job training. It's managed by my firm with certain conditions attached." Ethan was stunned. Why would she do that after everything I did to her? James glanced at him. She said something about breaking the cycle. That hatred and revenge just perpetuate pain, and she's chosen a different path. He shrugged. Plus, I think she's genuinely happy now and wants to close this chapter completely. Ethan looked out the window at the passing landscape, trees beginning to bud, new life emerging after the winter. I never deserved her, he said quietly. Not when we were married, and certainly not now. No argument here, James agreed. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about who she is, the kind of person she's chosen to be. They drove in silence for a while, Ethan overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't quite name. Finally, he asked, "Have you heard anything about Olivia?" "She's back in New York temporarily," James said, setting up a branch of her art therapy center in partnership with the Kensington Foundation. She and Isabel have been working on rebuilding their relationship. It's a process, from what I understand. "Good," Ethan said sincerely. "I'm glad they found their way back to each other. They always had a special bond. A bond you very nearly destroyed permanently," James reminded him, his tone sharpening. "Don't mistake Isabel's generosity for forgiveness or reconciliation. She's moved on completely, and she's made it clear she has no interest in having you in her life again." "I understand," Ethan said. "I wouldn't expect anything else." As they approached the city, the familiar skyline of Manhattan came into view. Somewhere in that skyline was Kensington Tower, the building that had once been the physical manifestation of his success, his power, his identity. Now it belonged to a company that had flourished without him, under the leadership of the woman he had betrayed. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," James said, "you do what everyone else does. You start over, you find a job, you rebuild relationships if you can, you try to be a better person than you were before. The trust fund gives you a chance, but what you do with that chance is up to you." "I won't waste it," Ethan promised. "I've had a lot of time to think about who I was, who I became, and who I want to be going forward." James nodded but didn't comment further. As they drove toward Brooklyn and the halfway house that would be Ethan's home for the next few months, Ethan looked again at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the life he had lost through his own actions, and the uncertain future ahead. The betrayal that had once seemed like a minor indiscretion, a personal matter that wouldn't affect his business or status, had ultimately cost him everything. But as he sat in James Wilson's car, a free man for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something unexpected. Hope. Not for wealth or power or status, but for the chance to live an honest life, to make amends where possible, and perhaps someday to find a measure of peace with himself. Was a beginning, modest and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. 1 month later, the sun sparkled on Lake Washington, turning the water into a canvas of dancing light. The small gathering of guests sat on white chairs, arranged on the lawn of David Anderson's cabin, watching as Isabel walked down the simple aisle of flower petals, her arm linked with her mother's. At 45, Isabel was a radiant bride in an elegant ivory silk dress, her dark hair adorned with tiny white flowers. She had chosen simplicity over extravagance for this second wedding. No designer gown, no hundreds of guests, no elaborate venue. Just the man she loved, the breathtaking natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest, and the people who meant the most to her. David waited at the end of the aisle, his smile lighting up his face as he watched Isabel approach. Beside him stood his best friend from medical school, serving as best man. On the bride's side, Rebecca Williams waited as matron of honor. In the front row, Olivia sat beside a few of David's family members, watching with tear-filled eyes as her sister prepared to begin this new chapter. The past month had been transformative for the sisters' relationship. While they were still finding their way back to each other, each day brought new healing, new understanding. Eleanor gave Isabel's hand a final squeeze before placing it in David's, then took her seat. The officiant, a judge who was a friend of David's, began the ceremony. "We gather today on the shores of Lake Washington to witness the union of two remarkable individuals, Isabel and David, who have found in each other a love that uplifts, supports, and inspires." As the ceremony progressed, Isabel found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, to this moment of joy that once seemed impossible. The betrayal that had shattered her world had ultimately led her to this new life, this new love, not because of the pain, but because of how she had chosen to respond to it, with dignity, resilience, and an openness to new possibilities. When it was time for the vows, David spoke first, his voice steady and warm. "Isabel, when we first met over a video call about a hospital project, I had no idea that conversation would change my life. You walked into my world with your intelligence, your courage, and your compassionate heart, and suddenly everything was brighter, more purposeful. I promise to cherish you, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with honesty and constancy all the days of my life." Isabel blinked back tears as she began her own vows. "David, you came into my life at a time when I wasn't sure I could trust again or love again. You never pushed, never rushed, just offered your steadfast presence and allowed me to discover day by day what a truly good man looks like. You showed me that real love isn't about possession or power, but about partnership and respect. I promise to love you honestly, to stand by you through whatever life brings us, and to build with you a home filled with joy, compassion, and purpose." The exchange of rings, the pronouncement as husband and wife, the first kiss as a married couple, all passed in a blur of emotion and happiness. Before Isabel knew it, they were walking back down the aisle together, now Dr. and Mrs. Anderson, surrounded by the applause and well wishes of their loved ones. The reception was held on the cabin's expansive deck overlooking the lake. As the small band played and guests enjoyed cocktails and dinner, Isabel found a moment to slip away to the dock, needing a quiet moment to absorb the reality of this new beginning. Olivia found her there, standing at the edge of the dock with her shoes off, letting the cool water lap at her feet. "Running away from your own wedding reception?" Olivia teased gently, joining her sister at the dock's edge. Isabel smiled. "Just taking a moment. It's been quite a day." "You look happy, Belle. Truly happy." "I am," Isabel confirmed. "David is everything I didn't know I needed." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water. "I never thought we'd be here," Olivia said finally. "Standing together at your wedding, speaking to each other again. There were days I was sure I'd lost you forever. There were days I thought the same," Isabel admitted, "but something Mom said kept coming back to me, that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened, it's about not letting it control your future." "Wise woman." "Our mother," Olivia said with a smile. "She is," Isabel agreed. "She also told me that you've been offered a permanent position here in Seattle, heading up the art therapy program at the Children's Hospital." Olivia nodded. "The Montana Center is in good hands with my assistant director, and with the funding from the Kensington Foundation, we can help so many more children here." She hesitated. "I wanted to make sure you were okay with me being here, in your new city." "It was my idea," Isabel revealed. "When David mentioned they were looking for someone to develop the program, I immediately thought of you. Your work with those children in Montana is remarkable, Livy. You found your calling." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "You recommended me after everything?" "Because of everything," Isabel corrected. "The past 3 years have changed both of us. You're not the person you were then, and neither am I. We've both had to rebuild our lives, find new purpose, and forgive ourselves," Olivia added softly. Isabel reached out and took her sister's hand. That's often the hardest part. From the deck, they could hear David calling Isabel's name, looking for his bride. "You should go back," Olivia said. "It's your wedding day." "Come with me," Isabel said, not letting go of her hand. "Let's go back together." As they walked back toward the celebration, Olivia asked, "Have you heard anything about Ethan since his release?" "James says he's settled into the halfway house, starting a job training program next week. The trust fund is helping him get established." "It was remarkably generous of you to set that up for him." Isabel shrugged. "It felt like the right thing to do, not for him necessarily, but for me. I didn't want to carry anger or bitterness into this new chapter of my life." "Do you think you'll ever see him again?" Olivia asked carefully. "No," Isabel said without hesitation. "That chapter is completely closed. I wish him well from a distance, but he has no place in my life now." As they rejoined the reception, David immediately came to Isabel's side, his eyes full of love. "There you are, I was about to send out a search party. Just needed a sister moment," Isabel explained, smiling up at her new husband. "Well, it's almost time for our first dance," he said. "Are you ready?" "More than ready," she assured him as David led her to the center of the deck, now cleared for dancing. The band began playing at last the song they had chosen together, with its message of finding love after long waiting. David took Isabel in his arms, and they moved together in perfect harmony, as if they had been dancing together all their lives. From the sidelines, Eleanor and Olivia watched, both wiping away tears. "She found her way," Eleanor said softly. "Through all the pain and betrayal, she found her way to happiness." "We all did," Olivia replied, "in our own ways." And as the sun began to set over Lake Washington, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the small gathering celebrated not just a marriage, but the triumph of resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings. 3 months later, Ethan Kensington sat in a small cafe in Brooklyn, nursing a cup of coffee as he reviewed his notes for an upcoming job interview. After completing a computer programming course funded by the trust Isabel had established, he was cautiously optimistic about his prospects. The past 3 months since his release had been a humbling experience. From the halfway house to the small studio apartment he now rented, from the entry-level training program to the community service he performed each weekend, everything in his new life was a reminder of how far he had fallen and how much he still had to rebuild. Many doors remained closed to him. His criminal record meant that certain types of jobs were out of reach. Old business associates avoided him. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now his biggest liability. But there were small victories too. He had reconnected with his sister in Philadelphia, who had invited him to visit her family for Thanksgiving. The programming instructor had praised his aptitude and work ethic. The elderly residents at the nursing home where he volunteered seemed genuinely pleased to see him each Saturday. It wasn't the life he had envisioned for himself, but it was a life with purpose and the potential for meaning. Ethan Kensington. He looked up to see a woman standing by his table, regarding him with curious eyes. It took him a moment to place her. Jennifer Lane, the former Kensington employee who had exposed his fraud with her evidence. "Jennifer," he said, surprised. "This is unexpected." "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Ethan nodded, closing his notebook. Jennifer sat down, studying him with the same analytical gaze he remembered from their time working together. "You look different," she observed. "Prison changed you." "Yes," he acknowledged simply. There was no point in denying the obvious. "I heard you were released, working in tech." "Now, trying to," he said. "I just finished a coding boot camp, have an interview next week for an entry-level position." Jennifer nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "I saw Isabel last week. She was in New York for the Foundation's quarterly meeting." "How is she?" Ethan asked, unable to help himself. "Happy," Jennifer said. "Really happy. The marriage, Zoza, and the work she's doing with the Foundation is changing lives." Ethan smiled slightly. "Good. She deserves happiness." Jennifer regarded him thoughtfully. "You know, when I was gathering evidence about Singapore and Red Diamond, I was certain you were a sociopath, someone incapable of remorse or empathy. I thought you'd never change, never understand the damage you caused." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now I'm not so sure," she admitted. "There's something different about you. Less arrogance, I suppose." "Prison has a way of destroying arrogance," Ethan said dryly. "It's hard to feel superior when you're serving food in a cafeteria line." Jennifer unexpectedly laughed at that. "I can imagine." Her expression grew more serious. "The reason I stopped when I saw you, I'm heading up a new tech initiative at Kensington Enterprises, developing software for pediatric hospitals. We need programmers." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "No," Jennifer said quickly. "That would be inappropriate given our history, and you're not qualified for what we need yet. But I know people at other companies. Smaller startups that might be willing to take a chance on someone with your background give you the experience you need. Why would you help me? Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled. Jennifer considered the question. Because I believe in second chances, I suppose, and because Isabel set up that trust fund for you, which suggests she believes you deserve one too. I wouldn't go that far, Ethan said. I think she did it for herself, not for me. To close that chapter cleanly. Perhaps, Jennifer acknowledged. Either way, if you're serious about rebuilding your life, I might be able to make a few introductions. No promises, but it could help. Ethan was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected offer. I'd appreciate that, he said finally, and I'd work hard to prove it wasn't a mistake. Good, Jennifer said, taking out a business card and writing a number on the back. Call this person tomorrow. He runs a small software development shop. In Queens, tell him I sent you. As she stood to leave, Ethan asked, Why did you really do it, Jennifer? Expose the fraud, gather all that evidence. It must have been risky. Jennifer paused. My sister died of leukemia when she was 9, she said quietly. The money you were diverting through Singapore, some of that was supposed to go to pediatric cancer research. That made it personal. With that, she walked away, leaving Ethan with her card and a renewed sense of the ripple effects of his actions, how his choices had impacted people in ways he had never considered. He tucked the card carefully into his wallet. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an opportunity, a small chance to begin making amends, not just through words, but through actions. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, and you're sure you have everything you need for the presentation? Isabel asked, organizing papers on her desk at the Kensington Foundation's Seattle headquarters. For the 5th time, yes, Olivia said with an affectionate eye roll. The board will approve the expansion. The results from the first 6 months, far too impressive to ignore. The sisters had been working together for half a year now, with Olivia's art therapy program becoming one of the Foundation's most successful initiatives. What had started as a small pilot at Seattle Children's Hospital had expanded to 3 additional hospitals, with plans to go nationwide. Their professional relationship had evolved alongside their personal one, tentative at first, then increasingly comfortable as they discovered their complementary skills and shared passion for helping children. Sorry for being a control freak, Isabel said with a smile. Old habits die hard. You wouldn't be you if you weren't slightly obsessive about details, Olivia teased. They were interrupted by Isabel's assistant. Dr. Anderson is here to see you. David entered, giving Isabel a quick kiss. Ready? For lunch, ladies. I've only got an hour before my next surgery. Just finishing up, Isabel said, gathering her purse. The 3 of them had lunch together once a week, a ritual that had helped solidify the new dynamics between them. As they walked to a nearby restaurant, David updated them on his latest cases, while Olivia shared amusing stories about the children in her program. Isabel mostly listened, enjoying the easy rapport that had developed between her husband and her sister. Over lunch, the conversation turned to the upcoming holidays. Mom's invited us all to Connecticut for Christmas, Isabel said. She says, the house is too big for just her, especially during the holidays. Sounds perfect, David agreed. I was able to get the whole week off. What about you, Livy? Isabel asked. Will you come? Wouldn't miss it, Olivia assured her. Though I should warn you, I've become quite good at baking over the past few years. I might take over Mum's kitchen. She'd probably welcome the help, Isabel said. She's been complaining about holiday cooking for decades. David's phone beeped with a message. I need to get back, he said apologetically, standing and dropping a kiss on Isabel's forehead. See you at home. Olivia, good luck with the board presentation. After he left, the sisters lingered over coffee. Olivia studied Isabel with a smile. You're glowing these days, Belle. Marriage agrees with you. It does, Isabel confirmed. Though it's not just David, wonderful as he is, it's everything, the foundation, the work we're doing, this new life we've built. We, Olivia repeated. It means a lot to hear you say that. Well, it's true, Isabel said simply. I couldn't do this without you. Your work with the children is the heart of what the foundation stands for. They were quiet for a moment, both reflecting on how far they had come since that fateful night at the Plaza Hotel. "I saw something interesting on the news this morning," Olivia said, changing the subject. "A new tech startup that's developing software for pediatric hospitals just received major funding. The lead programmer gave an interview about their work." "And?" Isabel prompted, sensing there was more to the story. "It was Ethan," Olivia said carefully. "He looked different, humbler. He talked about wanting to use his skills to help children, to give back in some way." Isabel was silent, absorbing this information. "Jennifer mentioned she might help him find a position in that field," she said finally. "I'm glad it worked out. Does it bother you, knowing he's out there building a new life?" Isabel considered the question. "No," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I meant what I said at the wedding. That chapter is closed. I wish him well, but he's not part of my life anymore." "I have truly moved on," Olivia observed. "We all have," Isabel said, reaching across the table to squeeze her sister's hand, "and that's exactly as it should be." As they left the restaurant, heading back to the foundation offices to prepare for the board meeting, Isabel felt a profound sense of gratitude. The betrayal that had once dominated her life had faded into the background, replaced by new love, renewed family bonds, and meaningful work. The path to this point had been difficult, paved with pain and challenges she had never expected to face. But standing here now, walking beside the sister she had nearly lost, anticipating an evening with the husband who loved her completely, Isabel knew she wouldn't change a thing. Because sometimes it took darkness to reveal the light. Sometimes it took betrayal to lead to truth. And sometimes it took losing everything to find what truly mattered. 5 years later, the auditorium of Seattle Children's Hospital was filled to capacity for the annual Kensington Foundation Benefit Gala. On stage, Isabel Anderson, now 50 but as elegant as ever in a deep blue gown, stood at the podium addressing the crowd. 5 years ago, we began with a simple mission: to improve the lives of children facing medical challenges, not just through treatment, but through compassion, creativity, and community. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Kensington Foundation has funded research, treatment programs, and support services that have touched the lives of over 50,000 children nationwide. The applause was enthusiastic, as Isabel continued, highlighting the Foundation's achievements and thanking its supporters. In the front row, David watched his wife with pride, while beside him sat Eleanor Grant, now 71, but still sharp and vibrant. "And now," Isabel said, "I'd like to introduce the director of our Art Healing Hearts program, which has expanded to 30 hospitals across the country. My sister, Olivia Grant." Olivia joined Isabel on stage, the two women embracing briefly before Olivia took the podium. At 41, she had grown into her role as a leader in the field of art therapy, respected for her innovative approaches and genuine connection with the children she served. "Thank you, Belle," she began. "When I started the first Art Healing Hearts Center in Montana 8 years ago, I could never have imagined where that journey would lead. Today I'm honored to share some of the remarkable stories of healing and hope that have emerged from our programs." As Olivia spoke, showing slides of children's artwork and sharing stories of transformation, Isabel watched from the side of the stage, her heart full. The betrayal that had torn them apart had ultimately led them here, to these new versions of themselves, to this work that mattered. After the speeches and presentations, as guests mingled and enjoyed the reception, Isabel found a quiet moment with her mother. "You've built something extraordinary, darling," Eleanor said, taking Isabel's hand. "Both of you have." "We learned from the best," Isabel replied with a smile. "Your strength, your wisdom, it guided us even in our darkest moments." "You found your own strength," Eleanor corrected gently. "I just reminded you it was there." Across the room, Isabel noticed David, deep in conversation with a hospital administrator, while Olivia was showing some of the children's artwork to potential donors. Her family, her team, her life's work, all in one room, all thriving. Later that evening, as she and David drove home to their house overlooking Lake Washington, he asked, "Happy?" "Completely," she answered, watching the city lights reflect on the water. Though sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that something so good could come from something so painful. That's the mystery of it all, isn't it? David mused. How our worst moments can sometimes lead us exactly where we need to be. Isabel nodded, thinking about the long, winding path that had brought her here, from that night at the Plaza Hotel through the scandal and recovery, to this peaceful drive home with the man who had shown her what true partnership looked like. The betrayal heard around the world had once defined her, had threatened to destroy everything she valued. But in the end, it had been just one chapter in a much longer, richer story, a story of resilience, redemption, and the remarkable capacity of the human heart to heal, to forgive, and to begin again. As they pulled into their driveway, the house, warm and welcoming with lights glowing in the windows, Isabel knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been difficult, even heartbreaking at times, but it had led her home, to this life, this love, this purpose that filled her days with meaning. And that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. The end 10 years later, the autumn. Leaves created a colorful canopy over the walking path that wound through Central Park. Isabel Anderson, now 55, walked alongside her sister Olivia, both women bundled in stylish coats against the October chill of New York City. It feels strange to be back, Isabel admitted, looking around at the familiar skyline in the distance. Like another lifetime. It was another lifetime, Olivia replied, now 46, and carrying herself with a quiet confidence that had been absent in her younger years. Her blonde hair was cut in a stylish bob, with more strands of silver now mixed in. So much has changed. The sisters had returned to New York for the 10th anniversary gala of the Kensington Foundation, a celebration of the organization that had grown from Isabel's initial vision into one of the most respected pediatric medical charities in the country. The event would be held at the Plaza Hotel, a deliberate choice that symbolized how completely they had both moved beyond the painful events that had unfolded there 13 years ago. David was sorry he couldn't come, Isabel said as they paused to watch a group of children playing nearby. This conference in London has been planned for months. How is the world's most dedicated pediatric surgeon? Olivia asked with a smile. Wonderful as always, Isabel replied, her face softening at the thought of her husband of nearly 10 years. Though talking about cutting back his surgery schedule and focusing more on teaching, says he wants more time for us to travel. They continued walking, catching up on family news. Eleanor, now 76, was still active and sharp, though she had moved to Seattle 3 years ago to be closer to her daughters and the foundation headquarters. Have you heard from Rebecca? Olivia asked as they approached the Bethesda fountain. Yes, she confirmed she'll be at the gala tomorrow night. Kensington Enterprises is doing better than ever under her leadership. The stock price has tripled since she took over. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years since you left New York, Olivia mused, since we started rebuilding our relationship. Isabel squeezed her sister's arm gently. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best after marrying David. They found a bench and sat down, watching tourists take photos around the fountain. The decade that had passed had been good to both sisters. Isabel had built the Kensington Foundation into a powerhouse of pediatric medical funding and innovation, while Olivia's Art Healing Hearts program had become a model for therapeutic interventions for children facing medical challenges. Their personal relationship had healed too, not to what it had been before, that was impossible, but to something new and perhaps stronger, built on hard-earned understanding and forgiveness. There's something I need to tell you, Olivia said after a moment of comfortable silence. Something I should have told you years ago. Isabel turned to look at her sister, noting the sudden seriousness in her expression. What is it? It's about Ethan, Olivia said hesitantly. About what really happened between us. Isabel felt a flutter of unease. Ethan Kensington was rarely mentioned between them. After his release from prison, he had rebuilt a modest life in the tech industry, developing software for pediatric hospitals. They had all moved on, the painful past relegated to history. Livy, that was 13 years ago, Isabel said gently. Whatever happened, it's in the past. I know, Olivia nodded. But with the foundation anniversary and being back at the plaza tomorrow night, I've been thinking about it a lot. About the truth. What truth? Isabel asked. Her curiosity piqued despite herself. Olivia took a deep breath. The night at the plaza when you found us together, it wasn't what you thought. She paused, gathering courage. I didn't sleep with Ethan. Not that night. Not ever. Isabel stared at her sister in disbelief. What? But I saw you together. You were kissing. You admitted to the affair. We were kissing, yes, but it was the first time and it was a setup, Olivia explained, her voice tight with emotion. Ethan arranged for you to find us. He wanted a way out of the marriage without losing his position in the company. I don't understand, Isabel said, trying to process this revelation. Ethan knew you would never leave the company voluntarily. You were too invested in it, too good at what you did. But he also knew that if he had an affair, especially with your sister, you'd have the sympathy of the board and investors. He thought it would give him leverage in the divorce. But why would you go along with it? Isabel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia looked down at her hands. Because he threatened me. He had evidence of tax evasion from my modeling days, documents I had signed without reading carefully. He said he would turn them over to the authorities if I didn't help him. Why didn't you come to me? Isabel asked, hurt evident in her voice. I was ashamed, Olivia admitted, and afraid. I had made so many mistakes already. I thought you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think it was just another excuse. Isabel was silent, absorbing this new information that rewrote the narrative. She had believed for 13 years. When everything fell apart for Ethan, when you took control of the company and the financial fraud came to light, I was shocked, Olivia continued. I had no idea about any of that. I thought it was just about him wanting out of the marriage. When he threatened Mom to make me steal your phone, I realized how dangerous he really was. Is that why you went to the SEC? Isabel asked. Olivia nodded. I wanted to make things right, to stop him before he hurt anyone else, but I was too ashamed to tell you the whole truth. All these years, Isabel said slowly, I thought you had betrayed me in the worst possible way, that you had slept with my husband. I betrayed you by agreeing to help him hurt you, Olivia said, tears forming in her eyes. That was real, but not the affair. I would never have done that to you, Belle. Never. Isabel stood up and walked, a few steps away, needing space to process this revelation. The narrative that had shaped the past 13 years of her life, the betrayal that had led to her divorce, her takeover of the company, her move to Seattle, her new life, was suddenly being rewritten. Why tell me now? She asked finally, turning back to face her sister. Because we're going back to the plaza tomorrow night, Olivia said simply. Because we've rebuilt our relationship, our lives, and I can't bear to have this lie between us anymore. She paused. And because Ethan is dying. What? Isabel felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet once again. Pancreatic cancer, Olivia explained. Terminal. His doctor gives him less than 6 months. He contacted me last week, asked to see me. He's the one who urged me to tell you the truth, said it was time to set things right before he's gone. Isabel sat back down beside her sister, trying to make sense of these revelations. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I don't know what to feel. I understand, Olivia said softly. It's a lot to take in. I'm so sorry, Belle. Sorry for my part in hurting you, and sorry for not telling you the truth sooner. They sat in silence for several minutes, the sounds of the park continuing around them, children laughing, tourists chatting, the splash of the fountain. Finally, Isabel reached over and took her sister's hand. Thank you for telling me now, she said quietly. It doesn't change what happened afterward, the company, the fraud, everything that led us to where we are today. But it does change how I understand that night. Can you forgive me? Olivia asked, her voice small. I forgave you years ago, Livy, Isabel assured her. This just puts things in a different light. As they walked back toward their hotel, both lost in thought, Isabel found herself re-evaluating not just the past but the present and future as well. The betrayal that had defined so much of her journey had been real, but not in the way she had believed. Ethan's manipulation had been even more calculated, more deliberate than she had realized, and now he was dying, seeking some kind of redemption or absolution in his final months. Did he ask to see me? She found herself asking as they waited. To cross a busy street. Olivia hesitated before answering. Yes, but he said he would understand if you refused. Isabel wasn't sure how to respond. The Ethan Kensington chapter of her life had been closed for a very long time. Did she want to reopen it even briefly? I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Olivia nodded. There's no pressure, Belle. I just thought you should know the truth. Back at their hotel, Isabel excused herself to call David. As her husband's familiar voice came over the line, she felt the comfort and stability that had characterized their years together. How's New York? He asked warmly. Surprising, she replied. Olivia just told me something that's made me rethink everything about what happened with Ethan. She explained the revelation, David listening patiently as he always did. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. That's a lot to process, he said finally. How are you feeling about it? Confused, Isabel admitted. Shocked, a little angry to be honest. Not just at Ethan, but at myself for never questioning the narrative. You had no reason to, David pointed out, and in the end, does it really change that much? Ethan still betrayed you, still committed fraud, still tried to hurt you. The only difference is that Olivia wasn't as complicit as you thought. That's a pretty big difference, Isabel said. I spent years believing my own sister had slept with my husband. True, David acknowledged, and I understand why this is so jarring. But look at where you both are now. You've rebuilt your relationship, your lives. This new information doesn't change the present, just your understanding of the past. Isabel smiled, grateful once again for her husband's wisdom and perspective. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, he replied, and whatever you decide about seeing Ethan, I support you. After hanging up, Isabel stared out the window at the New York skyline, now lit up as evening fell. Tomorrow night, she would walk into the Plaza Hotel for the first time since the night that had changed everything. And now, with this new understanding, she had a decision to make about whether to see the man who had orchestrated it all. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed for the Kensington Foundation's 10th anniversary gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables, adorned with elegant floral arrangements. Photographs and interactive displays showcased the Foundation's work over the past decade. Children whose lives had been saved by funded research, hospitals with state-of-the-art pediatric wings, art therapy centers bringing healing through creativity. Isabel stood near the entrance in a midnight blue gown, greeting guests alongside Olivia. The awkwardness that had briefly resurfaced between them after yesterday's revelation had faded, replaced by a new understanding and the solid foundation of their rebuilt relationship. Rebecca Williams arrived with her husband, embracing both sisters warmly. At 53, Rebecca had maintained her position as CEO of Kensington Enterprises with remarkable success, expanding the company beyond even what Isabel had envisioned. My prodigal founder returns, Rebecca teased, looking around the ballroom. Hard to believe it's been 10 years since you left New York. Feels like another lifetime, Isabel replied. You've done amazing things with the company, Rebecca. I couldn't be prouder. Well, I had an excellent teacher, Rebecca said with a smile. Though I definitely inherited a cleaner operation than you did. No secret fraud schemes to untangle. As more guests arrived, donors, hospital administrators, physicians and board members of both the Foundation and Kensington Enterprises, Isabel found herself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. From the devastation of that night 13 years ago to the thriving foundation and the fulfilling life she had built, it had been a path of unexpected turns and profound growth. Midway through the evening, after dinner had been served and before the formal program began, Isabel slipped away for a moment of quiet. She found herself in a secluded corner of the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom, watching the celebration from a distance. It's quite an achievement, a voice said behind her. The foundation, what you've built. Isabel turned to find Jennifer Lane approaching. Now in her late 40s, Jennifer had risen to become Chief Innovation Officer at Kensington Enterprises, her early whistleblowing about the Singapore fraud having ultimately led to a distinguished career. Thank you, Isabel said warmly. Though I can't take all the credit, it's been a team effort from the beginning. Jennifer nodded, joining her at the railing. I saw Olivia earlier. She seemed different somehow, more at peace. She told me the truth, Isabel said simply. About that night, about what really happened with Ethan. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. I see, that explains it. She paused. I always wondered about that. The timeline never quite made sense to me. What do you mean? Isabel asked, curious. When I was gathering evidence about Singapore and Red Diamond, I was tracking Ethan's movements, his meetings, his calls. There was never any evidence of an ongoing affair with Olivia, just that one night, almost staged in its visibility. Jennifer shrugged. But I was focused on the financial fraud, not his personal life. I didn't think it was my place to question the narrative about your sister. It wasn't your responsibility, Isabel assured her. I should have asked more questions myself. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the celebration. Below, have you decided? Jennifer asked finally. About seeing him. Isabel wasn't surprised that Jennifer knew about Ethan's request. The former special projects manager had always had an uncanny ability to know what was happening before anyone. Else, I'm still thinking about it, Isabel admitted. Part of me wants to just leave the past in the past, but another part wants closure, Jennifer finished for her, especially now that you know the full story. Something like that, Isabel nodded. Did you know he was ill? Yes, Jennifer said. He told me a few months ago. We've kept in touch over the years professionally. His work on hospital software systems has been quite innovative. This was news to Isabel. You've maintained a relationship with him? Not a relationship exactly, Jennifer clarified. More of a professional courtesy. After his release, when he was struggling to rebuild, I helped him get that first job. The rest he did on his own. Isabel was quiet, absorbing this information. Do you think I should see him? Jennifer considered the question. That's not for me to say, but I will tell you this, he's not the same man who orchestrated that scene 13 years ago. Prison changed him. Working with children changed him more. Before Isabel could respond, Olivia appeared, looking slightly anxious. There you are, she said. The program is about to start. They're waiting for you to begin your speech. Isabel nodded, pushing the thoughts of Ethan aside for now. Tonight was about celebrating the foundation and its work. Tomorrow would be soon enough to decide whether to close this final chapter of her past. The gala was a resounding success, raising over $10 million for the foundation's programs and generating publicity that would lead to even more donations. After the last guest had departed and the staff was beginning the cleanup, Isabel found herself once more on the terrace where she had discovered Ethan and Olivia 13 years before. The night was cool, the city lights twinkling beyond the park. Isabel stood at the railing, remembering the shock, the pain, the sense of betrayal she had felt on this very spot. But now, with the truth revealed, the memory had lost some of its power. The betrayal had been real, but different from what she had believed. Ethan's manipulation had been calculated, but Olivia's transgression had been born of fear and weakness, not callous disregard for their sisterhood. I thought I might find you here, Olivia said, joining her on the terrace. Full circle. Something like that, Isabel agreed. I've been thinking about what you told me about the truth. And? Olivia asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. I want to see him, Isabel decided, speaking the words aloud for the first time. Not for him, but for me. To understand exactly what happened, why he did what he did. Olivia nodded. I'll arrange it. He's staying at an apartment in Brooklyn. Outpatient treatment for now, though the doctors say it won't be long before he needs hospice care. The sisters stood together in silence for a moment, the cool night air wrapping around them. You know, Isabel said finally, for years I defined myself by that moment of betrayal. It shaped so many of my decisions, my view of myself, my understanding of what happened after. And now to learn it wasn't exactly what I thought. Does it change how you feel about your life now? Olivia asked. Isabel considered the question. No, she said after a moment. The path was different than I understood, but it led me exactly where I needed to be. With David, with the foundation, with you and Mom, with the work that gives my life meaning. Then perhaps the details of how it began matter less than where it led, Olivia suggested. Isabel smiled at her sister, struck by the wisdom in her words. When did you get so philosophical? Somewhere between Montana and Seattle, Olivia replied with a smile. Between art therapy sessions and rebuilding my life. Between losing you and finding you again. They embraced, both aware of how precious their reconstructed relationship was, how easily it might never have happened at all. Let's go back to the hotel, Isabel said. Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough. The brownstone apartment. Building in Brooklyn was modest but well maintained, a far cry from the penthouse Ethan had once owned on Park Avenue. Isabel stood on the sidewalk, gathering her courage before approaching the entrance. She had come alone, despite Olivia's offer to accompany her. She pressed the intercom button for apartment 3B. After a moment, a voice answered. Ethan's voice, though weaker than she remembered. Yes? It's Isabel, she said simply. There was a pause, then a buzz as the door unlocked. Third floor. The elevator is to the right. The building was quiet as Isabel made her way up. She had deliberately chosen a weekday morning for this visit, wanting privacy and calm for what promised to be an emotional conversation. Ethan was waiting at the door to his apartment when she stepped off the elevator. The sight of him was a shock. At 58, he looked 20 years older. The cancer had ravaged his once athletic frame, leaving him thin and stooped. His hair, now completely grey, was thinning, and his face was gaunt, with deep shadows under his eyes. Isabel, he said, his voice raspy but warm. Thank you for coming. Please come in. The apartment was small but comfortable, filled with natural light from large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. Bookcases lined one wall, while another displayed framed photographs of children, patients, Isabel assumed, from the hospitals where his software was used. Can I get you anything? Tea? Coffee? Ethan offered, moving slowly toward the kitchen. No, thank you, Isabel declined, taking a seat on the sofa. Please sit. You look like you need to rest. Ethan nodded gratefully and lowered himself into an armchair across from her. The cancer is aggressive, he explained, seeing her look of concern. The treatments buy time, but not much else. I'm sorry, Isabel said, and meant it. Whatever Ethan had done, she wouldn't wish this suffering on anyone. Don't be, he said with a small smile. I've had more time than I deserved to make amends, to do something worthwhile. He paused, studying her face. You look well, Isabel, happy. I am, she confirmed. Very happy. Good, he said simply. That's good. He took a shaky breath. Olivia told you about what really happened that night? Yes, Isabel nodded. Though I'd like to hear it from you. Ethan nodded slowly. I owe you that much at least. He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. The truth is, I was planning to leave you for months before that night. Not for Olivia, not for anyone specific. I just wanted out. Why? Isabel asked, the question that had lingered for 13 years. Because you intimidated me, Ethan admitted. Your intelligence, your financial acumen, your integrity. I knew I couldn't match you in any of those areas, and it made me feel inadequate. The more successful we became, the more I resented you for your role in that success. That's why you started the Singapore fraud? Because you resented me? Partly, Ethan acknowledged, but mostly because I was greedy and arrogant. I thought I deserved more, deserved everything. When Michael Davis approached me with the Red Diamond scheme, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to set up my escape plan. And Olivia, Isabel pressed. Why involve her? Ethan looked down at his hands, visibly ashamed. Because I knew it would hurt you the most. Because I thought if you caught me with your sister, you'd be so devastated that you'd walk away from the company, leave everything behind. I'd file for divorce on grounds of abandonment, keep control of Kensington Enterprises, and eventually shift everything of value to Davis Technologies. The callousness of the plan still had the power to shock Isabel, even 13 years later. You would have destroyed her reputation, her career, just to hurt me? Yes, Ethan admitted. I threatened her with those tax documents, told her all. She had to do was let you catch us in a compromising position. One kiss, that's all it was supposed to be. He shook his head. I never anticipated that you would react the way you did, with such strength, such determination. Taking control of the company, exposing the fraud. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past hanging between them. Why tell me now? Isabel asked finally. Why not take this to your grave? Because I'm trying to make things right before I go, Ethan said simply. Not for absolution, I don't expect or deserve that, but because the truth matters. Because you and Olivia deserve to know what really happened. Isabel studied the man before her, diminished physically, but somehow more substantial in his humanity than the ambitious, ruthless person she had married. You've changed, she observed. Prison. We'll do that, Ethan said with a wry smile. So will working with sick children. So will facing your own mortality. He paused. I've tried to do some good these past 10 years. The software systems I've developed have helped streamline treatment protocols, improved outcomes. It's not enough to balance the scales, but it's something. The scales don't need balancing, Ethan, Isabel said gently. Not with me, at least. I made a new life, a better one than I could have imagined. The foundation, David, my relationship with Olivia, none of that would have happened if things had been different. You were always remarkable that way, Ethan said with genuine admiration. Always able to find the opportunity in the crisis, the strength in the challenge. They talked for another hour about the foundation, about Ethan's work, about the separate paths their lives had taken since the divorce. Not as friends exactly, but as two people who had once been important to each other, now finding a measure of peace in truth and understanding. As Isabel prepared to leave, Ethan said, There's one more thing. In my will, I've left everything to the Kensington Foundation. It's not a fortune, nothing like what Michael Davis left you, but it's something. I hope you'll accept it. Isabel was momentarily speechless. Ethan, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. It feels right. A final contribution to the good work you've built. Outside on the street, Isabel paused, looking up at the windows of Ethan's apartment. She had come seeking closure, understanding, perhaps even the last remnants of anger finally laid to rest. What she had found was something more complex, a man changed by time and circumstance, a truth both simpler and more complicated than she had believed, and a sense that the circle that had begun 13 years ago was finally complete. As she hailed a taxi to take her back to her hotel, Isabel felt lighter somehow, as if the last weight of the past had been lifted from her shoulders. The betrayal heard around the world had not been exactly what she had thought, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be, and for that, despite everything, she could only be grateful. 3 months later, the winter sun cast a golden glow over Lake Washington as Isabel Anderson sat on the deck of her home, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the chill. At 55, she still found beauty in these quiet moments of reflection, perhaps even more so now than in her younger years. The past 3 months had been a time of processing and integration, returning from New York with the revelation of what had truly happened 13 years ago had left her with much to consider, much to reevaluate. The story she had told herself about Ethan, about Olivia, about the betrayal that had shaped so much of her life, had not been entirely accurate. And yet the path it had led her on was one she wouldn't change. Thought I might find you out here, David said, stepping onto the deck with 2 steaming mugs. At 60, he was as handsome as ever to Isabel, his silver hair and laugh lines only, adding to his appeal. Tea with honey, just how you like it. Thank you, she said, accepting the mug gratefully as he settled beside her on the outdoor sofa. I was just thinking about Ethan, David guessed. Knowing his wife well after nearly 10 years of marriage, Isabel nodded. The hospice called this morning. They don't think he has much time left, days perhaps. After their meeting in Brooklyn, Isabel had maintained contact with Ethan's doctors, wanting to be informed of his condition. When he had been moved to a hospice facility in Seattle 2 weeks ago, wanting, he said, to be near the headquarters of the foundation that would receive his estate. Isabel had visited twice brief but meaningful encounters. Are you going to see him again? David asked, no judgment in his voice. Yes, Isabel decided. Today, I think. Olivia's flying in tonight, but I feel like I should go now." While he's still lucid, David squeezed her hand in understanding. "I think that's the right decision. Do you want me to come with you?" "No," Isabel said with a grateful smile. "This is something I need to do alone. But thank you for offering. You've been so supportive through all of this." "That's what partners do," David replied simply. "Support each other through the complex stuff, not just the easy parts." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the winter light play on the lake's surface. Their relationship had always been characterized by this easy understanding, this space for each to process in their own way while remaining connected. "It's strange," Isabel said finally. "For so long I defined myself in opposition to what I thought happened that night. The betrayed wife who rose from the ashes, who built something new from something broken. Now I know it wasn't quite what I thought, but the story still shaped me." "The facts may have been different," David observed, "but the emotional truth was real. You were betrayed, just in a different way than you understood, and you did rise from it stronger and wiser." Isabel nodded, once again grateful for her husband's insight. "I should get ready to go to the hospice," she said, finishing her tea. She dressed in simple, comfortable clothes appropriate for the visit. Isabel thought about what she wanted to say to Ethan in what might be their final conversation. So much had already been said during their meeting in New York and her subsequent visits to the hospice. Yet she felt there was something still unresolved, some final understanding to be reached. The Sunset Hills Hospice was a peaceful facility, set among trees, designed to provide comfort and dignity in life's final chapter. Isabel was shown to Ethan's room by a compassionate nurse who whispered that he had been asking for her. Ethan lay in the hospital bed, his body now a shadow of the vital, ambitious man he had once been. The cancer had consumed him rapidly in the past weeks, leaving his face gaunt and his breathing labored, but his eyes still held awareness, intelligence, and something Isabel had rarely seen during their marriage: humility. "Isabel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you came." "Of course," she replied, taking a seat beside his bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I'm dying," he said with a hint of his old dry humor. "But the pain medication helps, and having visitors, it means a lot." They talked quietly for a while about simple things: the view from his window, the kindness of the hospice staff, the weather. Ethan asked about David and the foundation, genuinely interested in Isabel's life and work. "Olivia arrives tonight," Isabel told him. "She'll come see you tomorrow." Ethan nodded weakly. "I'm glad. I want to thank her again for telling you the truth, for being brave enough to set things right." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice stronger, as if he was summoning his last reserves. "Elf energy. I've been thinking a lot about that night, about everything that followed," he said, "about how one decision, one moment of selfishness and manipulation set so many things in motion." "Me too," Isabel admitted. "It's strange to think how differently things might have turned out." "I wanted to hurt you," Ethan said, meeting her eyes directly. "To wound you so deeply, you'd walk away from everything we built. I thought I was so clever, so strategic. But in the end, you were stronger than my pettiness, my greed." "Not just stronger," Isabel corrected gently. "Luckier. I had people who stood by me: Rebecca, Maria, my mother. And I found David, found a love that was genuine and supportive in a way ours never was." Ethan nodded, accepting this truth without resentment. "You deserved that kind of love. I wasn't capable of giving it then. Too self-absorbed, too focused on what I wanted." "And now?" Isabel asked, curious about the man he had become in these final years. "Now I understand what matters," Ethan said simply. "Too late for a do-over, but not too late to die with some measure of peace, knowing I tried to make amends in the time I had left." Isabel reached out and took his hand, surprised at how natural it felt to offer this comfort to the man who had once hurt her so deeply. "I think you've succeeded in that, Ethan. The software systems you developed for children's hospitals, your work since prison, it's made a difference. Not enough to balance the scales," he said, "but something." "The scales don't need balancing anymore," Isabel told him. "At least not between us. I forgave you a long time ago, even before I knew the whole truth." "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you," she explained. "And because the path that began that night, painful as it was, led me to a life filled with purpose and love. In a strange way, I'm grateful for where I ended up, even if I would have chosen a different route to get here." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Isabel, but thank you for giving it anyway." They sat together for a while longer, no more words needed between them. When Ethan's eyes began to close, fatigue overtaking him, Isabel gently squeezed his hand. "Rest now," she said softly. "I'll come back tomorrow with Olivia." As she left the hospice, stepping out into the winter afternoon, Isabel felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun 13 years ago on that fateful night at the plaza was closing now, not with bitterness or triumph, but with compassion and understanding. Ethan Kensington died peacefully in his sleep that night before Olivia's plane landed in Seattle. The sisters visited the hospice together the next morning to pay their respects and speak with the staff who had cared for him in his final days. "He was waiting for you," the head nurse told Isabel, "holding on until he had a chance to see you one last time. After your visit, he seemed at peace, ready to let go." The small private funeral was held a week later, attended by only a handful of people: Isabel and David, Olivia, Eleanor, Jennifer Lane, and a few colleagues from the tech company where Ethan had worked after prison. No grand eulogies, no elaborate ceremony, just a simple acknowledgement of a flawed man who had, in the end, tried to make amends for his mistakes. As promised, Ethan left his entire estate to the Kensington Foundation, a modest but meaningful, final contribution to the organization that represented all that was good and positive that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. 2 weeks after the funeral, Isabel, David, and Olivia sat in the warm kitchen of Isabel's home, finalizing plans for the Foundation's newest initiative, the Ethan Kensington Memorial Program for Pediatric Software Innovation, which would fund the development of new technologies to improve children's hospital care. "Are you sure about naming it after him?" Olivia asked, concerned. "Given everything that happened." "I'm sure," Isabel said firmly. "His work in this field during his last years was meaningful, and it feels right somehow." A final acknowledgement. That good can come from even the most painful chapters of our lives. Eleanor, now 77 but still sharp and engaged, joined them at the table with a pot of fresh tea. "I always said you had the most forgiving heart, Belle," she observed, "even as a child." "It's not about forgiveness, exactly," Isabel tried to explain. "It's about honoring the full circle of a life, the journey from who he was then to who he became at the end." David, always perceptive, added, "And about acknowledging that all of our stories are complex, with chapters of failure and redemption, selfishness and generosity." They fell into a thoughtful silence, each contemplating the strange path that had led them to this moment. From that night of betrayal at the plaza to this peaceful kitchen overlooking Lake Washington, from broken relationships to healed ones, from pain to purpose. "I've been thinking," Olivia said, finally breaking the silence, "about expanding the Art Healing Hearts program to include a digital component, using some of Ethan's software concepts to reach children who can't physically attend the centers." "That's a wonderful idea," Isabel said warmly, "a perfect integration of both your work." As they continued planning, sharing ideas and possibilities, Isabel felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. The betrayal that had once seemed like the ending of everything meaningful in her life had instead been the beginning of something richer, deeper, and more purposeful than she could have imagined. The phone rang and David answered it. "It's the hospital board," he said, handing it to Isabel. "They want to discuss the new pediatric research wing." As Isabel took the call, discussing funding and timelines with the enthusiasm that had characterized her leadership of the foundation. For the past decade, she caught Olivia's eye across the table. Her sister smiled, a smile of understanding, of shared history, of a bond that had been tested and broken, but ultimately reforged into something stronger. 5 years later, the Kensington Foundation's 15th anniversary celebration was held in the Seattle Children's Hospital's newly completed Research and Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art facility funded largely by the foundation and dedicated to advancing pediatric medicine through technology, science, and compassionate care. At 60, Isabel Anderson stood at the podium, her elegant silver hair framing a face still beautiful, now marked with the wisdom and experience of 6 decades of life. Beside her stood Olivia, now 51, and David, 65, all 3 of them beaming with pride as they officially opened the center that represented the culmination of years of vision and dedicated work. 15 years ago, Isabel began, addressing the crowd of medical professionals, donors, and patients' families. The Kensington Foundation began with a simple mission to improve the lives of children facing medical challenges. Today, as we open this Research and Innovation Center, we celebrate not just what we've accomplished, but the journey that brought us here. She looked out at the assembled guests, spotting familiar faces. Eleanor in the front row, still vibrant at 82, Rebecca Williams, who had recently retired as CEO of Kensington Enterprises, Jennifer Lane, now running her own tech company, and dozens of others who had been part of the Foundation's growth over the years. Life rarely follows the path we expect, Isabel continued. Sometimes it takes us through darkness before leading us to light. Sometimes what seems like an ending becomes the beginning of something more meaningful than we could have imagined. Her eyes met Olivia's, then David's, both nodding in understanding of the unspoken reference to the betrayal that had ultimately led to this moment of triumph and fulfillment. This center represents the best of what can emerge from challenges overcome, from visions pursued with determination and courage. It stands as a testament to the power of transformation, not just of institutions or buildings, but of human hearts and human lives. After the ceremony, as guests toured the new facility with its state-of-the-art research labs, therapeutic spaces, and the Art Healing Hearts digital studio that was Olivia's pride and joy, Isabel found a quiet moment alone in the center's peaceful garden courtyard. She sat on a bench, taking in the beauty of the space designed for children and families to find moments of peace amid medical challenges. A plaque on the bench caught her eye, a simple dedication that read, "In memory of Ethan Kensington, whose journey reminds us that redemption is always possible." Isabel touched the plaque gently, thinking about the long, winding path that had led from betrayal to this moment of fulfillment and purpose. The man who had hurt her so deeply had also, inadvertently, set her on the path to her greatest happiness and most meaningful work. David joined her, sitting beside her on the bench. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just reflecting," she said, leaning against his shoulder, "on how life takes us places we never expected, on how what seems like the worst moment of your life can sometimes be the beginning of the best chapter." He nodded, understanding as always. "The betrayal heard around the world," he said, referencing the phrase that had once defined the scandal but had since been reclaimed as the title of the Foundation's origin story. "Exactly," Isabel agreed. "Who would have thought that night at the plaza would ultimately lead to all of this? To us, to the Foundation, to reconciliation with Olivia, to a legacy that will help children for generations to come." "Life is full of surprises," David said, kissing her temple. "Some painful, some beautiful. The trick is to remain open to where they might lead." Olivia found them there, joining them on the bench. "The digital studio is a hit," she reported happily. "The children are already using the new programs. Some of Ethan's last designs are actually the most popular." The 3 of them sat together in comfortable silence, watching families explore the garden, hearing the occasional laugh or exclamation of delight from a child discovering a hidden feature designed to bring joy amid difficult circumstances. "We did it, didn't we?" Olivia said finally. "We found our way through the darkness. We built something meaningful from something broken." "We did," Isabel agreed, taking her sister's hand on one side and her husband's on the other, together. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light over the garden, Isabel felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. The betrayal that had once defined her had become just one chapter in a much larger, richer story. A story of resilience, forgiveness, purpose, and love. The circle was complete. The journey from that night at the Plaza Hotel to this peaceful garden in Seattle had been long and sometimes painful, but it had led exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by love, engaged in meaningful work, at peace with the past and hopeful for the future. And that, Isabel knew, was the greatest victory of all the end.